What's up everyone, welcome back to another year. Since this is the very first video of the year, I thought we would do things a bit differently this week. Yes, we are going to create this old alarm clock, but I feel like it's been a while since we made a tutorial-based video, so that's exactly what we're going to be doing this week. We are going to go through the full process from 3D modeling, UV mapping, and texturing, and talk about a few little tips and tricks along the way. So for beginners and people fairly new to 3D modeling, I'm hoping this will help clarify some of the process and how everything's put together, and possibly even learn a thing or two along the way. And that's actually a big reason why I chose to make an alarm clock. Not only do I think it's a great model to go through the full process where we can cover a wide variety of topics, but I feel like we can also do this in a decent amount of time so it doesn't take up our whole day. Now, since we have a lot of different topics to cover, let's not waste any more time and let's just dive right into it. So the first thing to do was find some reference. So I found a few different references online, and as you can see, I found this one, which was one of the first vintage alarm clocks that I saw on Google Images, and I thought it looked cool. One of the first decisions I had to make was if I wanted to make the 2-bell alarm clock where they have this little shape, the bells on top, or the more singular one. And I feel like the more vintage alarm clocks have this singular bell, so I decided to go with this. So I gathered up a few different references, one on the front, a few just showing the back. We have to make these little twisty components on the back to wind them. And then another one just showing the shape from a side angle. Now, normally on this channel, I don't use a lot of image planes. I always tell people it's good practice to not use image planes just so you can play with proportions. But image planes are extremely important, and we should really always be using them. Also, if you're working in the industry and you're working for a studio or a client and they want a specific model off of a specific shape, you should always use an image plane so you know that your proportions are more accurate, and you can just save yourself a lot of time. So we're going to do a little bit of both today. What I'm going to do is actually I will leave this reference on our screen here, and I'll just make it really small. And I also decided to just find an image plane that we can use. So I found this once again on Google Images. It's not perfectly orthographic, but it will be useful to figure out our main shapes. And it'll be hopefully easier for others to follow along and create the exact same model. So what I'm gonna do to start things off is go into my front camera view. So by hitting spacebar, I can change my viewports. Well, I'm gonna go down to the front. I can click on this and go up to View, Image Plane, and Import Image. So what I'm going to do is find that image that I have, which is on my desktop. So if I can find it here. Now, I'm not going to worry about this size. It is important to size your models accurately, so you can do that at the end, which I like to do a lot of the times. But if you're interested, you can always go up to Windows, Settings, Preferences, go down to Settings, and you can choose your working units. So right now it's set to centimeters, so we can set the scale of this model if you want. So if I know that the width of this, for example, is a certain amount of centimeters, what I like to do is just quickly insert a cube, and I can actually change the scale since I know it's in centimeters. So I can change it to, like, let's say 10 centimeters, and this will be 10, and I can scale my image reference to be 10 centimeters. Now we're not gonna do that right now. I'm gonna scale it up at the end, but that's something you can do at the beginning if you think it's helpful for you. Now, another important thing you can do is select your image plane. If you go to your attribute editor, right under the image plane attributes, where display is, right now this image plane is showing in all of my viewports, which is, I mean, it's helpful, but not always helpful to work in a 3D space like this. So what you can do is select this image plane and make it look through a specific camera view. So right now it's only looking through the front or perspective, whichever other camera view you're interested in. So I'm going to set this to only look through the front for now. And then we can basically just start our modeling. So before I like to start modeling, I like to just more or less stand back and visualize the shapes in my model. So it helps me plan how I'm going to attack or tackle all these different shapes without having to guess along the way. So for example, if you look at this clock right here, it's basically filled of a bunch of different cylinders. So this main shape is one cylinder. As you can see, there's like one bump here. If I go to this other reference, it's a better example. There's like one bump here, and then another bump at the back. So one big cylinder. These legs are simple cylinders as well. It's basically filled with cylinders, and this top thing is one cylinder. So when I'm trying to think of how I'm going to first tackle this, it just helps me visualize it. So I'm going to start with this main shape first, and then we can start with the legs and so forth. Now, it really helps with more complex shapes where you can kind of sit back and plan out your model, but this really works for me. If it helps other people, you can draw it out on paper, but I like to just plan it in my head and just think a little bit before I jump into the 3D software and I start modeling everything. So now that we kind of planned it out, we have one big cylinder here. We're going to separate the inside face just to make applying a texture to it a lot easier. And it's just a bunch of cylinders. So now we kind of planned it out. It's a very simple model, but I wanted to go over this really quickly because I do it with all my models. I kind of sit back at the beginning before I start recording, and I just kind of visualize how I'm going to tackle it. And it really helps me save a lot of time on the whole modeling process. So let's shrink this down to make some room. Let's click on our front view by pressing spacebar in this viewport. And then we can start blocking out our shape. So I'm going to start off with a cylinder. And what we're going to do is rotate this. So if I hold J, I can snap it. And then I can just scale this up. Now it's also helpful to go into wireframe, which you can do up here. And then I can just scale this to roughly be the shape of my clock. Now, like I said, it's not perfectly orthographic, so it won't line up perfectly, but just to roughly know our proportions, so we don't have to guess them too much. Now, one thing I am going to talk about really quick before we proceed on is, depending on how your model is going to be used is depending on how you're actually going to approach your model. So for example, if for a video game and you're using high and low poly model workflow, then you might approach it differently than if you're just making a high poly model for a render or a product design. So in this case, it's going to be more for, let's say, a product. We will go over both, and I'll start with the low poly first. That way, if you are making this for a video game, you can still use the exact same approach. Now, one thing I want to talk about quickly, there's going to be a lot of different things we talk about in this video. I'm trying not to confuse you too much, but starting off with a specific amount of vertices depending on how you're going to approach it. So what I mean is, let's say I'm planning to use a high and low poly model workflow. Well, if I start off with a cylinder that's too low in polys, it can actually make things a lot more difficult. So for example, I'm just going to duplicate one over just so we can come back to it. But if I click on this first one, let's hide that second one. And let's say I wanted to use a really low poly model. So let's go with like 12 sides, for example. Well, if I were, this is just an example, if I were to bevel these edges and then hit 3 on my keyboard to smooth it, it looks very smooth. But because it's so low polys that if I were to actually add a smoothing effect to it, so things always look smoother, by the way, just in preview. So if I actually add a smoothing effect to the shape, well, as you can see, it's still quite blocked out. So we'll have to increase those divisions even higher, which results in even more polys. And you can avoid that sometimes by actually starting off with a higher dense mesh to begin with. So let's delete this, for example. Let's go back to our original shape, and let's leave this, instead of dropping it down to 12 sides, we're going to leave this at the standard size. And now if I bevel these edges, and I add a smoothing effect, we only have one subdivision, and it looks almost just as smooth. And that's just because our shape was a little bit higher in polys to begin with. So choosing how low your polys, how low poly shape is to begin with really determines how many subdivisions you're going to have to apply to it. So sometimes it's not worth making some shapes very low in poly because you have to add so many polys to make it look smooth. So in this case, my plan was to use more or less one mesh. I'm not going to use 2 meshes. So we're going to start off with a shape that's a decent amount of polys. So what we're going to do is actually just start off with the original cylinder shape that we had. We're not going to change the amount of vertices on it. We're just going to leave it at this. So what I'll do is start all over again just to show you. So this one starts off with 20 subdivisions. We're going to leave this at 20, but that's just something I wanted to keep in mind. If you didn't want to add any subdivisions, you can always start off with a higher amount of polys just to make it smooth. So for example, now it's quite smooth. I don't have to subdivide this out to actually have those smooth edges or the smooth curvature. So that's kind of a decision you need to make ahead of time, or if I wanted a really low poly model, well, I'm not going to start off with the 20, I'm going to start off with a lower amount of polys. Now this may be common sense for some people, but it is a little bit confusing if you're starting off with modeling, so just something to keep in mind. So we're just going to leave it at the 20, and we're going to go back to our front view, and I can take this and I can scale it to match my reference, just like we did at the beginning. Now I don't have a side profile, so we're just going to have to kind of ballpark it ourselves. So I'm just going to, we can always change it along the way. I'm just going to squish this in since we know that it's not too wide. So this, something like this should work. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to face. We can delete the front and back faces. Now, if you look at the curvature here, there's a nice little bump that goes. So we're just going to basically create this front little bump. So what I'm going to do is just take this and I'm going to extrude it. So Control E and scale it inwards to create that first bump. So we're like right here. Now I need to create one that comes out. So what we're going to do is extrude again. I can drag this one out. And then I can do the same process. So extrude this one in. And then I can extrude it in again. Now, rather than going straight in, it looks like there's a little bit of a lip. So what we're going to do is actually bring this back. I'm going to extrude this inwards again, and then go in. So there's a tiny little bit of a bump on the inside, as you can see. We can always scale these differently. So if I wanted to change the scale of this, what I like to do is change it to components. So right now it's an object. So if I scale this, for example, you can see it scales it not perfectly straight. It actually starts skewing it inwards a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just switch this to component mode. And that way it's going to stay nice and straight. That way I can just scale this back a little bit more to make it a little bit of a deeper edge here. All right, so that's going to be the front of our clock. Now we need to do the back. And this looks a little bit long, So let's just select one, double click. So I select the first one, hold shift, double click the one beside it, and it'll just highlight all of them around. And I can just make this a little bit shorter. And let's grab this one too, just to bring it back a tiny bit. So that looks good. Let's scale this back since it's a little bit wide. So we can make this just a little bit thinner. Now we're going to do the back part. So there's this nice bump here that goes to the back. So what we can do is select this out back edge and extrude it upwards a tiny bit and back. All right, so we have a roughly blocked out clock shape. Let's go to vertex and let's just drag these in a little bit more since it doesn't look like it's so wide. So if I hit 3 to preview smooth this, you'll see that we kind of have that shape that we're going for. Now this front edge is a lot harder. So what we can do is press 1 to remove our preview smooth, and we can go to our multi-cut tool at the top, and I'm going to hold Control, so it's going to give me a ring around it. I'm going to add an edge loop right around here. So when I hit preview smooth, 3 again, now it's a harder edge, and what I'm going to actually do is Control Z that. I'm going to add that edge on this side. That way it gives us a little bit more of that look we're going for, that bump. Now this is definitely also a lot closer, so let's double click these and our inside edge as well. And let's just bring this a little bit closer. All right, so we have our front of our clock roughly blocked out. Now it's a little bit bigger, so what I'm going to do is go back to 1, and all we have to do is just select these faces. I'm going to select them all and scale them inwards again. Going back to component, I can scale these to be a little bit thicker because I find there's a little bit bigger of a bump. And obviously the smaller we make it, the bigger of a bump we're gonna have. So maybe something like that for now. Now another thing I'm noticing is that when we go to the side view here and I press 3, it's bending a little bit too much. We need to add another supporting edge on this side. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing, go up to my multi-cut, holding control, I can add an edge loop somewhere up here. So let's add one here. And as you can see, so if I control Z while it's smooth, you'll see what's happening. It's bending it. So if I reapply that, let's go back, let's reapply that. I hit 3, now it's looking a little bit more straight and a little bit closer to our ref. Now we can double click this and drag it back a bit just to increase the bend, the curvature of this. And we're doing this all without adding an actual bevel, just using that smoothing modifier. Now it looks good. I'm finding that this is now looking a little bit too thin. So if I go back to this reference, it's looking a little bit thicker. So what we can do is just grab these ones, and it's in component. I can just drag this to be a little bit thicker. All right, that's looking pretty good to start off with. So let's go ahead and save. Don't forget to save your project in case it crashes and you lose all your work, because that's never fun. And there's also a bigger dent here at the back. So what we're gonna do is the same thing we did. We're just gonna press 1 to get out, go to our multi-cut tool. I'm gonna hold control and I'm gonna add another edge loop back here. So if I go to 3, and I double click this, I can drag this to go a little bit closer and it's gonna increase, have a harder edge here. I don't want it too aggressive, but there's definitely a bump here that's pretty obvious. So we can just play around with the shape. Now you can take your time and play around with this. I always find that don't worry about getting it too perfect right off the bat, because you can just drag on the process. We're just gonna roughly block things in and then we can start playing around with the shape a bit more afterwards. So I also find that this is a little bit, it should do. We're just gonna add one more edge loop up here, because as you can see, the same thing's happening where it starts bending. So if I add an edge loop here, it just kind of straightens it up and helps support it. I feel like that's a little bit more accurate. What we can do is actually take this back one. I'm just gonna delete that. I feel like it tapers out, it goes almost a little bit wider. So we're gonna actually grab this back edge and just scale it a little bit bigger first. And then I'm gonna add one more. Something like this, let's say, for now. And if I wanted to drag this in without changing this, because I have an edge loop and I want to, let's say I want to make this a little bit smaller. Well, as you can see, it's changing because I have this edge here. Now, of course, we can just delete this and reapply it, but a nice easy way you can also do that just by going to your modeling tab and going down to edge slide. So now it's going to follow the edge and I don't need to worry about the shape of this being skewed. All right, so things are looking pretty good. Let's save again. So next, let's go ahead and let's add our interface. So what we're gonna do for this main clock, the main face, is just by adding a simple cylinder. So let's add another cylinder to our scene. Holding J, I can snap it. I'm gonna hold Shift and select our other. I want it to be completely centered. That way I can scale this up to completely fit without eyeballing it. So I like using this align tool, which I use all the time. And you can actually find that up here. So let's go up to modify, snap align objects, align objects. If you hit the little square beside it, you just have to make sure that these 3 are checked. So if it's reset, it's always like this. So what we're gonna do is select these 2 and go last selected object and apply. So what we need to do is select our object, select the second one and apply, and it's gonna always center it. So what I do after you set these up, you can actually go up here, Control Shift, and you can apply this align tool to dock it up here, which I always have. So if you're wondering, this tool I'm always hitting, it's align, and every time now I put in an object, I can hold Shift and select another object I want to center it to, and I can just press that align tool and it's always going to center it. Now another way you can also do that is just by modify match transformations. So if I do the exact same thing, Shift select, I can also match translation, and it'll center it. So there's a few ways you can do that. So let's rotate this. I'm going to delete all of the faces on it. So I only have the front, and let's center that pivot, and let's delete our history. It's always good to delete your history, and then we can scale this up. And we're gonna just basically scale it until it's crossing into our mesh so we don't see the edge. And we can drag this in depending on how much depth there is. Now it's hard to tell, so we have to try to play with it a bit, but there's a glass cover. So what we're gonna do is just not worry about the glass right now. We're gonna drag this in and scale this pretty big. I'm gonna scale this one, or drag this one as well so it can intersect with that inside one. So we'll do something like this. It might be a little bit more actually. I think something like that will work. I also want to increase the thickness. So it looks like it's a harder edge. Right now it's really rounded on ours. So what we can do is select this inside edge and let's add a small bevel to it. I'm just going to add one bevel. And it's looking still a little rounded, so I'm going to do the exact same to this front one. We're just going to make it smaller. That way it looks a little bit more squared. And it almost looks like, it's hard to tell in the reference if it comes in a tiny bit. So I think it does. So what I'm going to do is double click these inside edges, and we're going to scale those. We can go to Object, scale those in a tiny bit. So it seems like it doesn't go straight back. It's like there's almost, it almost tapers in, and we're also going to drag it in a bit. I feel like it's a little bit too thin. So what I can do is go 3. We're going to go press W. That way we can drag this in a little bit to create a little bit more depth there. And something like this looks good for our clock. All right, so now we have that basically blocked out. What we're going to do is move on to, go to our front camera view so we can see how things are looking. Let's go ahead and let's add some legs. So it looks like a simple cylinder. So what we're going to do is start off with another cylinder. Let's drag this down, and holding J, I'm going to snap it. Ooh, let's go the other way. There we go. And it doesn't align perfectly, so we can just eyeball it to align. We can scale this down to match, and we can scale this up. All right, so what we're going to do is, you can see there's a bump pattern. So what we're going to do is start adding in some edge loops. Now there's so many different ways you can approach these shapes, so don't think that the way I'm doing it is the right way or the wrong way. There is no black and white, right and wrong way of approaching any shape. That's the best thing about modeling. It's really up to the artist. So just keep that in mind as you're approaching all these shapes. So for example, what I could do, we'll talk about a few for this shape for an example. So what I can do is highlight these faces on this cube or on this cylinder, delete it. This face is on the top, and I can scale this back. And let's go over 2 different methods, for example. So what I can do is just go to edge mode, highlight that edge, and I can start scaling it. So I can start extruding the edge. So I'm going to extrude it, and scale it up, go a little bit wide, and I can extrude it, and I can keep doing this basically over and over again. And we can do something like this. And that just goes right in, I believe. And we'll do the same thing. So I'm going to highlight the face. We're going to delete the faces on the bottom. So when I highlight all the faces, I can hold Control and select them to deselect some. So now only the bottom faces are selected, and I can delete them. And I can go back into edge mode, and I can do the exact same thing. So what we're going to do is just taper this in a little bit, and I can extrude and go down. Actually, we're going to just extrude like this. And then since we're at the very end, we're going to just extrude and go merge to center. And we have a leg. So that's one way you can do that, is by extruding. Another way that I was thinking about doing it while we were talking is like this. So I can just select this object, and I can just add edge loops. So like holding control, I can add an edge loop here, add an edge loop here, here, here. And then you can just take those edges. Oh. Zoom in, and then you can just scale them. It's basically very similar to the other method, just extruding, but for some reason just chose not to. So it's really up to you as an artist, depending on how you want to approach each shape. So we're just gonna leave that go with our first one. And as you can see, it's looking a little bit wide on the bottom. So we're gonna go to the vertices and just scale those in a little bit. And if I hit 3 on my keyboard, I can actually have a better view of how it's looking. So it is looking a little bit bumpy, but I want it to be more of an indent. So if I hit 1 to remove that, we're gonna add some edge loops. So I'm gonna double click one, double click these inside ones, holding shift so they're both selected, and I can add a small bevel to them. So let's increase the segments and drag down the fraction, sorry. That way when I hit 3 now, there's a harder edge for this inside bump. Now our camera is tilted back, it looks like a little bit, but we're not gonna worry about that right now. We can always adjust that later. What we're gonna do is just select these vertices and I can drag them down a little bit. May not align perfectly with this camera view, but it's not orthographic, so nothing's gonna align perfectly. It's just kind of there for our reference. Now the bottom's still looking a little bit too smooth, so we're gonna add another small bevel on this inside one. And we're gonna add one more on the bottom here. So I can hit G just to repeat the same process. We just did a bevel, so I can hit G. We can do another bevel. And if I hit 3 on our keyboard, we have a tiny little leg. So now that we have a leg, let's go back to our front view. I can just duplicate this over. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. I like to use the duplicate special. So we're gonna go back to world. And the red line means X if you look in this bottom corner. The green one is Y, and the Z is the blue. So we need to duplicate this to the Z axis. So I'm gonna go up to Edit, Duplicate Special. If I hit the little square here, I can make sure that the X, so right now the Y, so X, Y, Z. So I'm gonna, actually if I just go to reset values, you'll see how it looks like to you. I'm just gonna minus the scale in the X. So we wanna flip it. So if I press apply, it did not work. And the reason why it didn't work is because we didn't delete our history and freeze our transforms. So let's redo this. This is actually a good little learning lesson. As you see, the transforms are showing, they're all minus values, plus values. So if we freeze them, now it thinks the shape, this is the correct now zeroed shape, the rotation of the shapes. Now if we duplicate special, it's gonna actually work for us. And we can slide this over to match where our reference is. So let's go back to the perspective view. We can see how it's looking. Now, if you look at the reference, we're using 2 different references here, keep in mind, but I really like how the legs are a little bit wider on this one. So what we're gonna do is actually delete this one. I'm gonna go back to the first one, press 1, and I'm just going to scale this to be a little bit bigger. We can play around with these shapes depending on how big we want them, but I actually like, we can go back to object. But there's a little bit of a bump here and it's looking wider. Just so it's a little bit more obvious. Let's drag this one down too. We can play around with these after if we want, but we're just gonna make it a little bit bigger too. Maybe something like this looks a little bit better. You can honestly even go bigger. I like the look of it a little bit bigger, so why not? Maybe something like this. So let's go back to world, delete history, freeze transforms, edit, duplicate special, make sure that's on the Z axis, and let's apply. And once again, we can drag this over to match our ref. All right, so we have the legs done. We're gonna save it once again. And let's just add a back piece right now since we're here. So what we're gonna do There's a few different ways as well we can do this. So what I like to do sometimes, just since things are aligned properly in your scene, and I know that this is in the correct position, obviously since there's not much in our scene right now, it's really easy to add another cylinder and center it if we wanted to and rotate it, which a lot of people, I would probably do as well. But when you have a lot of objects in your scene, another really nice, easy way to make sure that things are aligned is just duplicate this original shape. So this is just a little trick I like to do. So I'll duplicate this shape. So right now I have two. I'm gonna isolate it by pressing the isolate option. And then I can start just extruding this back face. So I'm gonna extrude it once, just in. What I can do is highlight these and I can extract to separate it. So I have two shapes. I can delete this front shape. So now when I isolate it, this is in the exact location of that first shape I had. Now, obviously, like I said, in this specific shape, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but as you're modeling more models and you have lots of shapes in your scene, sometimes it's easier just to duplicate shapes and detach certain components like this so I know it's in the right spot. So now I can center, delete history, and I can do whatever I want with this. So now I can, let's say, grab this front edge. Let's extrude it outwards a tiny bit to add some depth. If you look at the ref, it looks like there's almost like a little bit of a lip here. You can kind of see some depth. So that's what we're gonna try to create. So what I'm gonna do is just extrude this side in a tiny bit. And I'm going to add a tiny bevel on each of these edges. Now, I don't want to add too much of hard edge. It doesn't look like it's completely flat. It looks like it's kind of around. So if we preview smooth this, I'm going to keep it fairly rounded. And what we can do is drag this back. And we can scale it up a tiny bit. It looks like it kind of overlaps a little bit. Something like this. This should work, and I actually like that you can see the gap for realism's sake. So let's just, what we're gonna do is just extrude this side in as well a tiny bit, and then add a tiny bevel to it. That way when I move this back close to it, I can actually leave a tiny bit of a gap. Not really, but you can see a little bit of a deeper imprint. And I think that looks pretty good. So what we're gonna do is go back to the back side now. And let's start modeling the back side. So let's go to our reference here. So it's really not thick at the top. So what we're gonna do is just, let's get rid of our preview smooth. Let's scale this back out. And we can scale this in, extrude, create that depth, and it goes in pretty far, it looks like. Here's another image of what the back, a different back. Obviously they're not the same, but it goes in quite a bit, and then we can extrude this inwards. And I like that there's a ring here. I'm actually gonna keep that for some reason. I just like it. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna keep an edge here. Obviously we can add an edge after, but I'm just gonna extrude it again to, oh, no, not this. In our scene here, I'm going to extrude. So now I added an edge loop, and then we can just merge to center. So if I hit preview smooth, hit 3 on our keyboard, we don't want this to intersect. So what we're gonna do is select these, go back to component. I can scale these in a bit. That way we're not going through our mesh. And we're gonna add, it's a pretty hard edge in here, it looks like, so we can actually select these two edges and add a bevel to them. So that preview smooth, it's gonna retain that edge. It also looks like it's a lot deeper, so let's go back, let's select all these faces, and these faces. And we can drag it in a little bit more to create that depth. And I can press preview smooth so I can see what it looks like smoothed out, since we are gonna smooth it. And something like that I think works. All right, so we have the back cover of our clock set, so we can save this as well. And then we need to start doing the top part. So let's go back to our front camera view where we can have an idea of what the shape looks like. And we're going to start by creating this middle piece. Let's add another cylinder. We can scale this down. Now, once again, if you're looking to save on polys, start with a smaller cylinder. So I'll go down and reduce this. Actually, let's just do that. So let's just reduce this to 16, for example. And then we can scale this up. So this is just going to go through our mesh. We can add a boolean if we want afterwards, which we will do for the higher poly mesh. But for now, we're not going to worry about it. And as you can see, it looks like it's kind of pushed near the back. Something like this. This actually looks a little bit too wide. So what we're going to do is just not preview smooth it. We can select all these edges and make it a little bit smaller. Look like it's so deep. And we can move this. I think it's somewhere around here. I don't think it's directly in the middle. You can obviously look at more reference online if you want to be 100% accurate, but I think something like this will work. Now what's happening right here is that it's just behind our reference. So what we're going to do is select this reference. I'm going to uncheck this in all views. I'm just going to push this back. It's not going to change anything from our front view, but now I can actually see that cylinder because it's hidden behind our reference. I can go look through front again, and now we can see it. All right, let's go back and go wireframe. And let's start modeling this little piece. So what we're going to do is go to vertex and let's start doing this. So what I can do here, I can delete the top and bottom faces. So select all the faces, hold control, deselect the middle ones, press delete. So now I'm left with a cylinder with no faces on the top or the bottom. So I can select these top ones, go back, and I can start basically scaling this or tracing this image here to follow this shape. So we're just going to keep extruding. You can see that one's a little bit wide, so we can Control Z. Oh, go back to this view. We can make this a little bit thinner here. Now it's not completely orthographic, so it's not going to line up perfectly. I'll just double checking that things are centered, but we're not going to worry about things not lining up perfectly. We're just using this as some sort of reference. So what I can do is just create the shape. Now they're all different online, so don't worry about getting everything perfect. We're going to extrude and merge to center. So now we have this tiny little piece that we're going to use. And we can start adding a few bevels to it. So this top one's pretty rounded, so I'm just going to double click or select the edge. Now if you can't find it, it's because you have to be actually over your object. So because there's an image plane behind, if I'm right clicking, I can't actually select it because I'm technically hovering over my image plane. So you can go off of your image plane, you can select edge, or I need to actually go over one of these edges and hit edge. And let's add a tiny bevel to the top here. Now this one in our reference is a little bit of a different shape, so don't worry about this looking too much. We're just going to follow this one. I kind of like how this one looks. But let's go to a few different views here. Press F just to center it. Zoom in, center it. I can double click these and give them a bevel as well. And let's go ahead and give this and this, these two edges another tiny bevel. So hit 3 and preview smooth how the shape is looking. It looks pretty cool, but I think we need one more edge loop on the bottom. Something like this should work. All right, so let's go back to this shape and let's add this large bell object that we have. So we're gonna start off with another cylinder once again. I'm going to scale this up wide so it fits, and then I can scale it in to create this shape. So we're going to do something like this. I'm going to right click, go to edge, double select this one, and I can give this a really big bevel. So we can increase the segments. Let's go to 3. I can drag this down to match. Something like this should work. I like how skinny this one is, so we can change the thickness of this afterwards. For the sake of this, let's just leave it like this for now. What I can do is select all these faces on the bottom. Now, of course, I'm going to select them on the opposite end, so we're just going to hold Control, and I can deselect all the other edges. Even Control, double click this edge loop to make sure none of these edges are selected on the back. So only the bottom faces are selected, and I can delete them. So if I hit 3 on my keyboard to preview smooth, and we have a little bell shape that's working. So what we need to do is create a little bit of thickness to this bell. So there's a few different ways we can do this. If you're trying to save polys, a really nice method is just not actually creating the depth everywhere. We just need to fake it just for the beginning. So we can actually bring this in like this and taper it in and kind of leave it like that. So we don't have to actually increase. We're never going to have a camera view shot this way. It's always going to be hidden. So there's little things you can do to actually fake and save on the extra geometry in your scene. You should cut back wherever you can. So we're just going to leave it like this for now, let's say. So what I can do is just create a few bevels on this to increase that edge. And that looks good. And let's just increase this height a little bit more so we don't make sure that we don't see it. So we're just going to fake it. All right, that looks good. And what we can do is now center this. I'm going to select this, shift select our stick object, and using that align tool, I can align it to that. And then all I have to do is go back to this, and let's bring this down a bit more. Okay, things are looking pretty good. Now, as you can see, this is obviously intersecting with our objects. So what we're gonna do is just scale this. I like the thinner look, the depth. It's not as like the height. So we're just gonna scale this in a little bit. And I'm gonna bring this up to match this bump here on the top. I think that works. We can play with this afterwards before we go onto our UVing. I think something like this should work fine. Actually, I want a little bit more depth, I think. And now looking at it, I feel like this bump on the back is just too big. So what we're gonna do is actually go back to our clock object. I'm gonna select all of these faces, as well as this beveled edge we created on the back. And I'm just gonna scale them in a tiny bit. Once again in component, and I'm just gonna bring that down. I don't want it to be too much of a bump. I think that's better. And we just need to scale in this guy to match. All right, I think that looks good. I find I don't like how round this is, so we're just gonna drag these back a bit. All right, I think that's looking good. So if we go to our reference, you can see, well, there's a few things going on. First, we have this little torus that's on the front. So this is a very simple shape. We can actually go ahead and just click the polygon torus, and we can drag this up. And we, of course, need to change the size. So what a lot of people do is you can go in your torus and you can actually mess around with the radius here and scale them in. I find that's actually more challenging because you're dealing with such a small line here. If you want to make it wider, and then you have to scale it in and keep playing around with that. What I like to do is go up to Edit Mesh and just go to Transform. And with this blue line selected, you can just drag this in and change how thick this object is. I just find this a lot easier, at least for myself. Obviously do whatever works best for you, but we're gonna do something like this. And we'll have to change the shape, actually, the thickness, because it's too big. Let's just drag this over so we know roughly how big it needs to be. So something like this, and we can go back to transform and make it thicker again. So maybe something like this. Of course, it's in the middle of this, so slide this back over. And so it looks like it's kind of cutting through. Now you can obviously add a Boolean in the middle of this, which we could do later to make it look even cooler. I think something like this will work. And I actually want this down. So what I'm going to do is press D on my keyboard, and I'm going to change the pivot point of this. So I'm going to move it to the center of this object. That way I can just rotate it down. It'll be easier for me to play around with the shape. I want it to kind of be sitting on the bell, so it looks like it's down. We can go back to world. We can move this up a tiny bit. Something like this I think works. Let's just move it this way. Something like that should work fine. And maybe it's looking a little bit too thick. So we can go back to transform. We can make it a tiny bit thinner. So you can play around with these all you want to your liking. I think something like that should work. And since we decreased the height of this, what I want to do is actually drag this down a bit. Something like that. All right, so things are looking pretty good. We have a clock. So we have to do the components now on the inside. Obviously we have to do all the other little things, but let's worry about this right now. So what I'm gonna do is just insert a ground plane, so polygon plane. I like to do this sometimes just so I can see where my floor is, and I can see how low my clock needs to be. So I'm gonna put those legs so they're roughly touching the floor. I'm not gonna obsess over it, but I need to basically make this lean back so it's touching the floor. That's kind of what it leans onto. And I'm not sure if this is actually straight. I don't think they are. I think this is tilted back. So we're gonna do this at the end. It's gonna make just building our clock arms and everything first. So we will tilt this back. So let's just hide our floor. Actually, we're gonna do this after. What I'm gonna do is go to my outliner, call it floor, and then I can just hide it from my scene. So we'll come back to it after. I can uncheck that grid pattern, just easier to look at. I actually like that this was higher. I'm gonna move this back. Indecisive, not really sure, but this works. I actually think this whole thing needs to come back a bit. Not sure, I should probably looked up reference a little bit longer before moving on to this, but this will be fine. We have our shape looking pretty good here. So next up is creating the inside components. There's a little bit of some inside stuff going on, and once again, if you look at our reference, I will throw more reference on the screen as well. I looked up some ads on eBay and on Amazon, which I find are really good sources for reference since people tend to take lots of different angles of their objects that they're selling. So, but as you can see, there's like a spring kind of going around this. So that's one thing that we can do. I also want to create a hole here. And we're going to do that after because you don't need to do it for your low poly model. So we're just going to actually leave this for now. But that's something I am going to add after. So let's go ahead and add a torus. So what we can do is go up to create polygon primitive, and let's create a helix. Sorry, not a torus. And let's scale this in, and let's center it once again along this using our align tool. Deselect, and I can just drag this down. So what we're going to do is go to helix settings here, and I can play around with these depending on what we want. So I want a little bit more height. It's obviously looking very fat right now. We want to make the width of these coils really skinny, so the radius needs to be reduced. And maybe something like this. Once again, we can play around with this later. And as you can see in this reference, it's pretty close. We can actually change the height so it's a little bit closer, and let's increase the coil amount. Something like that might work, maybe a little bit higher. All right, that will work. And then since it's a little bit low in poly, you can see those edges. What we're gonna do is isolate it. I can delete these end edges. And let's go ahead and add we're gonna soften the edges. So you can find it under the mesh display, soften edge. So if we click this, it's gonna just take those edges and soften it all so it looks round. It looks a little bit higher in polys now. All right, I think that's good. You're not gonna see up like this, so I think that's gonna work. just like so. What we can do is just scale it out a little bit. Looks like there's a little bit of depth. It's not like completely against it. There's a little bit of room between them. Maybe something like this. Maybe that's a little too much. We can play around with this once again later, but I think that works. So next is doing this long line here. I honestly have no idea what this object is, but I have a few references online to help us figure out how this shape works. But this is our main reference we're using, so we're going to use this image. Also, this other one that I started with, you can see it here as well. It's like a weird little shape. So let's create that. Now I'm going to create this long one by just a simple cube. So let's scale this up nice and thin. Let's scale this nice and thin and then scale it in. And it looks like this sits almost on the bottom. Once again, I'm not 100% sure how these work, but we can drag this up so it's a little bit higher. And it looks like it goes around this shape. There's like a hole here, maybe that it sits in. I'm not honestly sure how these work, but I'm pretty sure it goes skinny. So what we're gonna do is add another edge loop here. So holding Control, I can choose where I want this. I'm gonna add 2. That way I can select all of these faces and I can just scale them using the object orientation. I can scale this in to be a little bit skinnier. And let's move these back, because I'm pretty sure it's skinny here on the front. And it's also rounded, it looks like. So I'm going to select these edges and we're going to do a bevel. Increase the segments, and I'm going to go until it actually hits it so it's nice and round. And then we're going to add another cylinder for that front piece. So I'm going to center it to this using the Align tool again. Scale this cylinder nice and small, and I can move this to kind of fit on the front here. Now what we're going to do is not use our camera view because I can't really tell. It's hard to see actually. What I could do, just so we know the shape is right, is I can move this over just really quickly as I model it, just for the proportions. So we're going to do the exact same thing as we've been doing. Select them all, delete the top and bottom faces, and then I can select the top edge and extrude this out. And then we're going to go back in and then extrude and center, merge to center. So we have a little shape like this, and then it looks like it's wide on the bottom as well. So we can just extrude out and in. It looks like it kind of just sits on top. So let's go back to center this. We can scale this down to fit our object we made. And it looks like it just kind of sits on the end. I'm honestly not too sure. It's a little bit wider. Something like this, I think. Now, of course, we need to smoothen this once again. So what we're going to do is add another bevel on these 2 bottom edges. Increase the segments. Hit 3 on my keyboard to preview smooth. It looks cool except for the very top. It's clearly a little messed up. So what we're going to do is just add a bevel on the top. And I'm going to merge these, or not merge them, but just shrink them so they're very small. And I can figure out how this shape works. I'm not really sure. I think something like this should work. It's almost not as pointy. So maybe like this. That should work, I think. The ones in our other ref look a little smaller, so I don't want this piece to be too big. I want it to be a little fat and short. So maybe we'll do something like this. And it actually comes through on the bottom as well, I'm noticing, in this reference piece. So what I'm going to do is just highlight or isolate it, double click that bottom edge. I can extrude that in. and then extrude it down. So it goes through the geometry. We can see a tiny little piece on the bottom. So I can merge, it's smooth, so we need to isolate it once again. So I can isolate our object. And I can add a few bevels on these bottom pieces. That way when I smooth it, it's going to hold that form a little bit better. And we can kind of see it poking through the bottom a little bit. All right, I think this is looking pretty good. I don't know actually if it, let me really quickly look up some reference. All right, so I jumped on Etsy. I saw an ad, someone was selling one. And if you look on this image here, you can actually see how, as you can see this one, it actually does go around. So what we're gonna do is kind of copy that style. So what I'm gonna do is just go back into this object, and first off we can clean up these polys on the ends. I'm going to add, using that multi-cut tool, I'm going to connect these edges. So I can click on one, click on the other. I can right click to deselect it. And I'm going to add one in the middle. So holding Control and Shift, I can snap it wherever I want. I'm going to snap one right in the middle, and I can just attach so they're in quads. And what we're going to do is hold Control, and I can add one more edge loop behind. So if I unisolate it, I can add one more to it, and I can select this one and scale it inwards to give it some, a little bit of thinness. It looks like it actually, like in that picture I was showing, it's like rounded. It kind of sits around it. So that's actually what we're going to do. Make it fit a little bit more snug to it. And it also kind of bends a little bit, which I also like. So we're gonna add another edge loop, or actually just a few edge loops, maybe two. And I can select all of these and kind of just drag them down a little bit, And these I'm gonna select, I'm actually going to just bend it back. Select all of these. I can select this object and rotate it slightly. We're just eyeballing it. And it seems like it doesn't actually stick out that far. If I go back to that image, kind of close actually. So we can select all of these and let's just move it in. All right, so we can take these, I'm gonna group them. So holding Control G, centering the pivot. I'm gonna press D on the keyboard to center it to the top cylinder here. That way I can just turn this and it'll stay centered to that center piece. It seems like it kind of sticks to the side a bit, something like this. I think that should work. We're actually going to scale it up a tiny bit. I feel like it's a little bit too small. And we're going to actually just bend it once again. I'm just eyeballing this right now, just kind of playing around with the shape, not worrying too much about anything, just until it kind of looks and feels accurate. And I actually think it should have a little bit more of a bend. So that's what I'm doing, just bending it down a bit. Center that pivot, I can just scale this down. Move it a little bit. All right, something like this should work for now. So let's isolate this inside piece and let's actually add a few. And what we can do is actually add one more edge loop here, grab these edges, I can scale them inwards so we can kind of wrap it around so it's rounded at the back. Pressing D, I can change a pivot point just so I can round it out a little bit without adding some bevels on the back. I think that looks good. What we're going to do is add this extra, just long stick piece as well. So I'm just going to add a simple cylinder for that also. And I can go in. Now this stick is coming out on the right side in this reference that I'm looking at, and then this one that's on sorry, the right side here and the left side here. So I'm just gonna add it on the left side because I feel like I'm looking at this reference more. And I don't know honestly how these clocks work. So I'm just gonna eyeball it, but I think it's something like this. Let's say, just gonna do it fairly quickly. Something like that should work. And there's like a ball thing on the top. So what we can do is highlight all the faces, delete the top and bottom again. Double click that top one. I'm just gonna extrude it. You're not really gonna see this, but I want something to be there, just in case you do. So I'm just gonna add another edge loop on the bottom. So when I smooth it, kind of have a weird little ball shape, and you're not really actually ever gonna see this. It's not crazy important. So object, let's just scale this up. I think that's how they work. And let's scale these shapes a little bit to make it a little thinner. All right, so that should work. I'm actually going to Control Z that. I actually like it a little thicker. I lied. Okay, so there is obviously a hole here on the top, and originally I wasn't going to plan it. This is like our low poly mesh, let's say. So what we can do, let's just highlight all these except for our floor. We can Control G to group them. And let's just label this low poly. Because it doesn't have any booleans. It's very low poly, obviously a little too low in polys. You would have to bevel some out if you really wanted to keep it low. But we're going to duplicate this over so I can hide my low poly, almost like a backup. And I can create the high poly. Let's go back and smooth this so I can see what things are looking like. Preview smooth by pressing 3 on my keyboard. And we can start visualizing. So what I'm going to do is just increase the size of this a tiny bit. And we can actually just raise this up to the tiniest bit. Okay, so what we're gonna do is create our extrusion here. Now, before we start deleting some faces and stuff, you do need more polys to work with because it's really low. So we're gonna go ahead and just smooth out this object. And I'm going to, how many times do we want to smooth it is the question. Let's just move this. So we're going to use these 2 edges as our area that we're going to make a cut into. So it really depends on how many polys, like I said, you want to add. Since this is going to be our high poly mesh, let's go ahead and just increase the segments to division levels to 2. We're actually going to Control Z before we move these edges. As you can see, didn't like that. So we're just going to now increase it to 2. And we have our smooth geometry. We can grab this edge and move this up as well. So this is going to be our little extrusion that we make. So I'm going to actually go ahead and delete some faces. These 3. And we can double click those and extrude them down. So that's going to be our little area where the extrusion happens. As you can see, if we smooth it out, because we have more polys we're working with, it should actually work well. So we're going to double click this top edge and let's add 1 bevel to it. And what I'm going to do is add 1 edge loop in the middle of here. So I'm going to hold Shift and Control. We can find the middle, and I can press those. We're going to select these outside vertices. And I want it to be sent. So I'm going to press D to make sure my pivot point's nice and center. I'm just going to just drag these out the tiniest bit, just to help create a little bit of roundness on that piece. And because we have higher geometry, you're not really seeing any artifacts, at least too much. Now what you can do, what we're going to do here, is actually add 1 edge on each side. Because you want it ideally in quads, right? Don't forget. So we can go to here kind of create Now, sometimes you do need to play around with things to see how they look. So this is just the first thing that's jumping to my mind, and I'm not sure it's going to create some more artifacts, but we will find out. So I'm just going to go to the target weld because we obviously have more 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We don't want that. So what I'm going to do is actually do the center merge. Click the vertices, and I can merge these two. I can click on them, just drag them. Hitting D to change my pivot, I can actually, Control Z, drag these back tiniest bit. And we're gonna do the same thing we just did to these ones. So merge those two, select them, change the pivot, and just slide them up a little bit. Now if I hit 3 on my keyboard and I preview it, it's looking pretty good. We're actually getting a little bit more of an artifact than I want. And I think it's just because of the height. So as you can see, this is a little bit, actually go to the front view, you might be able to see it. This is a little bit higher than it should be, which is not ideal. And it's causing some of that artifact to happen. So what we can do is just, I like to just, you can ballpark it and go down. Some people might rage that this is not 100% accurate, but to be honest with you, it will work fine. And this one as well is a little bit high, so let's just let's preview smooth this shape, and it's looking a lot better. Obviously, you can spend more time, you can have a higher dense mesh to begin with if you want it looking really nice. But I think that works and kind of serves its purpose. Now, another thing we have to add is the hole that actually sits on the front. So for this one, we're going to do the same thing. I'm actually going to use, what the hell, let's just make a new, I'm going to, same thing, align it, a cylinder to the top we're going to use a cylinder as our Boolean. So I'm going to make a hole pretty big. I actually don't know how big the holes are, so we're just going to ballpark something like this. I think that's nice. Now, I like always, we should have done the Boolean technically before we increase all the subdivisions, because then I can smooth it out and look nice. But it'll be fine. Because sometimes, I'll actually show you, we'll go over this in a second. So right now we have this. Obviously these edges are looking a little bit hard, so I'm gonna select them and just soften edge again. So we have our hole, and I like it. This is our high poly mesh, keep in mind, so I don't need to worry about polys too much. And we'll go over the lower poly one in a sec. So let's just create a Boolean now in this object. So I'm going to select these two and isolate them. So I only have these two. This is where my hole is going to be. So let's go ahead and I'm going to select these and actually just do modeling tab, go to edge slide. That way I can just slide them out of my Boolean. It's just going to, honestly, it's just going to help me after my Boolean. So all right, so what I'm gonna do now is just select my cylinder, shift select my object. Let's do a save before, because we don't want to lose any of our work. And we can go ahead and do a Boolean. So I'm gonna go mesh, Boolean, difference A to B. Oh, I lied. Difference B to A. And once it's looking good, I can select my object and delete the history. So now we have to just worry about all of this weird stuff going on. So I can select these edges, and it's still on edge slide, so it should follow the geometry. I'm just going to move these. Then we can start collecting or connecting and merging some of these vertices. So let's go to our target weld tool. I like to clean up the unnecessary polys around the outside first, so we can just weld these ones together. Let's actually move this over. And let's go back to our weld tool. I like to just weld all of these ones together first. Oh, let's Control Z that because it wasn't center. And I don't want to do that. I want to be on target. So we can go back now and then target weld them. Let's do the same thing here. All right, so now we welded the unnecessary polys. Let's use our multi-cut tool and we can just connect these. Now, triangles around booleans, at least from my experience, are completely fine. I've never had any issues. We're not doing any weird and animating with this or bending or effects or anything. So triangles around booleans are usually okay. So we're just going to connect them. So at least we don't have any floating edges or vertices. So I've hit 3 on my keyboard. I can preview smooth. And as you can see, we have a nice little Boolean hole. So now we can just double click this and give it a little bit of depth. Turn off our transform constraint. And let's just move it down a little bit, double click our edge, and let's give this a very small bevel with a segment of 2. Now if I hit 3 and I preview smooth our high poly mesh, it's looking nice and you can see that detail. Now the thing is with, let's increase this a little bit. So next is actually creating a hole in this because this wouldn't work like this. We need to make this look a little bit more higher in poly. So let's isolate this object. And we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to actually use this pole to center it. We can drag this down to select these 2 objects. And this is where our Boolean is. I know it's centered to my pole, so this is where I actually want my hole to be. And I can play around with this to actually move it to center it a little bit better. Okay, so let's say something like this works. So let's do the same thing. What I'm going to do, since this object is lower in polys, I'm not going to use such a high poly cylinder. I'm actually going to use a lower poly cylinder, something like 12. You can maybe even go less. Let's go 10. Since we're going to increase the polys in this shape, it's just going to be easier for me to connect vertices if I have a lower poly cylinder to work with. So what we're going to do is, once again, create a Boolean. So select my cylinder, shift select this object. I can go mesh Boolean difference B to A and delete the history on it. And once again, let's do our welding. So vertice, make sure it's on target weld. We can just clean up. We can clean up both sides at the same time. So we cleaned up those first. Select these. I can just go over. And let's go ahead and attach these vertices. So I don't like attaching vertices necessarily to the outside. So what I would do in this situation is actually create a ring around it. So I'm just going to start kind of matching where we're going to fix that one. Don't worry about it. I'm going to add a cylinder or a ring around like so. So then I can actually go in with my target weld and go to this, then to the outside. You just get better results, at least from my experience. We can actually add an edge loop here. And we'll add one on the side over here as well. And let's go through and connect these. I'm gonna use my weld tool just to weld this. We don't need this edge anymore, so I'm gonna Control Delete this edge since we don't need it. And this is gonna go to the corner. And let's not forget about this one. And let's not forget about the backside. So same thing, let's use our weld tool to weld this one. Let's connect all of these vertices together. All right, so we have a shape. Now I didn't do this on the bottom side, so let's go ahead and create that ring like I talked about. It's just gonna help make the Boolean look a little bit better. Actually, no. Hold shift and actually just do this, and I'm going to manually fix these ones. There we go. We can fix this a little bit closer. Doing this fairly quickly, you can spend a little bit more time to get it a little bit cleaner, but what we're gonna do is select these two edges now, and we can add a very small bevel to them. So if I hit 3 on my keyboard, preview smooth, things are looking a little bit better now. Now, of course, we need to add one to this thing as well. So let's go and double select all these outside edges. Same with the bottom. And we can add a small bevel. One segment, so if I hit 3 on my keyboard to preview smooth, now we have a shape that's looking a little bit higher in polys, and it also has a nice Boolean hole, so in theory it would work a little bit better. Now our hole's looking still a little bit small, so what I'm going to do is isolate this. And what we can do, actually in this as well, cleaned up. You can spend some time cleaning this up to look a little bit better. But honestly, actually, I'm just going to leave it. I think it works. You're not going to see any of that. All right, so let's save and let's move on to a few other things. So I'm just going to make this a little bit thinner, longer, and I'm going to add a very, very small bend to it. Nothing is perfect, and I actually find in the reference it's like slightly bent, and I think that detail will go a long way. Scale that up to be a little thicker. All right, so that's looking good. Next is, well, we have a couple things. So one, I'm just gonna make this a little smaller and a little wider. You kind of just play around with the shape to what looks good to the eye at this point. But I'm liking how it's looking. Next, what we're gonna do is just work on these arms, clock arms. I'm not sure exactly what these are called, but what we're gonna do is go back to our front camera view, and we're gonna model them off of this. So what we're gonna start by doing is creating a cylinder, in which case we can center it to this face using that align tool again. I can snap by holding J, and we can start by creating this. Now, as you can see, it's not centered to this ref, so I'm not gonna center this to this at the moment. What I'm gonna do is just use this as some sort of guide. Since this is technically centered, we want this to stay centered to our clock. And like I said, this isn't orthographic or anything, so it's not gonna be perfect, but I think this will work. And what we're gonna do to save on some polys as well, you know, we want it to be realistic, I guess, so we're gonna do it like this. All right, I'm gonna add an edge loop around. That way I can select some of these faces. It looks like it's only like almost one face. I don't even know how. I'm not sure. You know what? It's up to you. I'm just trying to debate with how thick I want the arms to be, but let's just do it like this. What I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm doing something, since this isn't centered and I want to use this as my actual ref to make the shape, is I'm just going to duplicate this. So I have one shape that's going to be centered that we can center to after. I'm just going to move this to center to my ref. That way I can work on this specific shape right now. So what I can do is select one of these faces. Maybe the one here instead. And what we can do is just extrude this outwards. So this is going to be our arm, one of the hands, arms, I'm not really sure what you call them. but we're just gonna widen it the tiniest bit. And I can go to face mode, delete that face on the very end here. We don't want that face, so delete that. We can also make this thinner. So I'm gonna select all these vertices, just drag it to be thinner. And I can start extruding this. So pressing D once again, I can just change my pivot. So I want it to be straight. I can just extrude. Let's go to custom. And custom. Go very skinny. So what we can do now is just add some edge loops to give it that curvature. And we want it to be obviously centered. So we want to change the orientation. So every time I click on something, it stays the same. So we can scale this in, add another edge loop. Oh, that didn't work. Scale this in. And scale this in. I'm just pressing D to change the pivot. And if I hit 3 on my keyboard, I can start seeing how the shape's looking. Now, of course, this is going to bend in, so this big edge we need to add a bevel to. And we can add also an edge loop around this side. So holding Shift and Control, I can center it. It'll snap and find the center, and we'll just keep it a little bit thick. So if I isolate this object, if I hit 3 on my keyboard, as you see it's bending, so we need to add another edge loop behind this to stop that from happening. Let's go ahead and delete these back faces since we don't want those as well. So hit 3 now. It's a little bit better, but not there yet. So what we can do is just actually bevel the inside one to create some thickness and make it hold up its shape a little bit better. And what we can do is just make this nice and thin on the top. So this could be like our first clock arm. Now let's just scale this once again to be a little bit thinner. I think that looks pretty cool. I think it should work. So this is going to be our small hand. And let's actually make this a little bit thinner as well. All right, so that looks pretty good. And this is going to be one of our big arms, big hands. And we have the same sort of shape for this one. So what I can do, let's go back to our front. I'm just going to duplicate it and rotate it to create the second one. And I'm going to highlight all of these vertices. Go in world, I can just drag this. And also I can make it skinnier as well. So this arm isn't as wide. Like that. So we have our 2 different arms for our clock. And this is technically the center, which we're going to move it to in a sec. So what we can do now is create the other 2 small ones that we have. So let's go back to our front view. And I'm just going to actually use the same one just to save time. So we're going to duplicate this. I'm going to drag this down here, make it a lot smaller. and rotate it. And go to vertex, we can select all of these, change the pivot so it follows this line. I'm just gonna shrink them down. Actually, you know what? Because it's such a different shape, I'm actually just gonna select all these faces on the end, and just chop them off. That way I can just go in afterwards, press D, change my pivot, and I can just move this to be nice and skinny. I'm not 100% sure if there's a line here, but we can make our own clock hand as well, customize it if we have to. So selecting these vertices, I can change the pivot points and I can scale those to be nice and thin. So that could be our very small hand or arm on the bottom. And we can also do one right behind this one as well. So we can go up, rotate this one to be a little bit longer. Once again, D to change the pivot point. And let's drag this one out. So it's just layered behind. So I think this actually works well. So this is behind this one. It's like there's two different arms. So what we're going to do is move this one behind this one. And select these faces and delete them because it looks like it just goes. So if I just highlight these, you'll see what I'm doing. Basically, this one sits right in front. And I want to show that. I want to show that it actually is in front. So this one can be right behind. And what we can do is just take these, extrude, and just bring that in just to kind of fake that gap. So it kind of looks like they sit on top of each other. And there's also a large one in the middle that's kind of holding them all together. So we can use another cylinder, and what we can do is center it. I'm just gonna eyeball, and I can do something like so. Let's add a nice rounded bevel to it. Then we also need one down here. As you can see, we are getting some weird edges happening, and that's just because there's no edge. Nothing here. So what I like to do to fix this is just delete this front face. Let's just extrude it to give it an edge, supporting edge, and then we can merge. Just to basically create this edge going around. That way now when we smooth it out, it's gonna actually have a hard edge there and look a lot cleaner. We can do this for these ones as well after. Okay, so this is looking good. This is obviously not centered, so I can do is just using my eyeballs, we're gonna just roughly center it. We can fix these after. And then these ones are going to be basically right. Well, I'm not sure actually how this works. I think it's like how far in are these? I don't really know. But that should honestly work. And we are using a similar face to this, so this should be fine. All right, so we have our clock arms done. Next to do is add, well, we have to add a few things. One thing being the glass cover, which we will add soon. But just to make sure that everything's aligned correctly, I went ahead and created a graphic, and we will go ahead soon enough and I'll actually show you what I did for this. So let me quickly Photoshop. And I created this little graphic here. And I found it just online. So what I'm going to do is just save this, or I exported it already. So let me pull this up. So I basically found this image, which we will go through when we start the texturing to show you exactly how I created the face. I found this image online and added this one because I like the look of the double, but I couldn't find a nice image online. So just found one that works. So what we're going to do is use this image. So just to make sure everything's aligned correctly, sometimes I like to do this. So since this is a simple cylinder, it's already UV technically, what I can do is just, let's unfold, center it to our image. So I can do is just add a simple texture just to this face. This is just because I want things to be aligned. So it's like you don't have to even label it. I'm labeling it test, so we know it's not what we're actually going to use. What I can do is in this test image, I can go select that graphic that I just made. So clock face. And it's not perfectly square, which is why it's looking warped. So we need to fix that really quickly. So let's jump back into Photoshop. I need this image to be a perfect square. So canvas size, width, copy, or I guess height. There we go. And let's make it white. And this image that I used, we're just deleting these. We'll go over this more. I just want you to see exactly what I'm doing. So now I can export this as my clock face. So now when I jump out, it's not warped anymore because it's a square ratio. So what I can do is just eyeball my UV shell. And if I turn on the color, so we can see textures, you can kind of see what it's going to look like. So let's just obviously make it, I don't want it to be too reflective. The reason why I'm doing this is because this is the actual graphic that we're going to be using in Substance Painter. So if I can make this look fairly accurate in here, now it's going to look not so warped. This is just right now, but the reason why I'm doing this is because I want this to be, so I'm going to select all these arms. Let's first center this to our clock. And then I can take these other ones that I made and I can align these to these ones. Oh my goodness, my mouse. My hands aren't working today. Here we go. And that way I can just kind of make it feel like it actually fits with this specific graphic that I'm using. Since we use a different graphic to make it. There we go. So we can do something like this. And this we can bring in more. So we can do something like that. All right, so we have our clock face basically done. Don't worry, we're gonna work on this afterwards, but this will be fine for now. So next, because right now it's looking a little bit warped on the outside, but that's just because we don't really have it centered too much. Maybe that will work better. Okay, so our clock is looking pretty good. Next up is just basically, I want to take this whole thing and group it, center it to here. And the reason why I'm doing this is I just want to basically rotate it a tiny bit. It's just looking a little bit too straight for my liking. I think that should work. If I knew how these clocks work, probably would make a little bit more sense, but to be honest with you, this is going to be fine. So let's move on to the back of our clock. So we have our clock, which looks fairly accurate. I think what we need to do is just, checked. Oh. What I'm going to do is just with this one, I'm just going to move it up a little bit more. And then we can just duplicate special. So I know they're the exact same height, and I can find roughly where it's sitting. Okay, so that's looking good. Let's save. Let's do the components on the back really quick. So since this is its own object, we can treat it differently. I like separating these objects. If it was one mesh, you would have to worry about, you know, booleaning out the main mesh and how many polys are on it anyway. So we're not going to worry about any of that. Since it's a separate mesh, we can treat this as its own little face. We can add some booleans wherever we need them. So we're going to use this as our main ref. So if you were planning on making an in-game mesh, you obviously don't need to add any of these holes. In fact, this bottom little dark one, you can add it just as a texture, as like a dark texture into the mesh to make it look like there's a hole there when there really isn't. So there's lots you can do to fake it, and you don't really need to worry about, you know, getting everything looking perfect. So we're going to start off by just ballparking where these cylinders go. So what I'm going to do is, once again, start off with the cylinder. I'm going to center it to this back piece, rotate it, shrink it down, and there's basically one on the top. There's another one around here, and there's another bigger one here, roughly between them. Kind of see what I'm doing. Looks like that this one's actually in the middle. So we can make this one in the middle. I'm using the lines to match to make sure it's in the middle. So one's in the middle, one's a little higher. This one's on the side, kind of between them. And there's another one over here. And if you want them to align perfectly, I can match that edge to that, and I can match that edge to that. So it's like roughly the same position, without getting too crazy about it. So what we're going to do is actually not do any booleans. I'm just going to add the one boolean on the bottom here, but these ones we can fake. We actually don't need it. So for example, this one, it looks like it's just a tiny face that's sitting. It's like a little bump. And then this, we can delete the front and back faces. I can extrude this in to create that little depth. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. I can duplicate this cylinder up, fit this inside. So this is just gonna fake our depth. So as you can see, I'm gonna extrude to make it look like there's a hole here, but there really isn't. That way when I bevel these edges and I smooth it, it looks like this is kind of coming out of a hole. And then for this one, it's the same thing, but it's like a tiny hole here. Actually, I don't know if it goes in or not. Like, is there an extrusion here? We don't know, but what we're gonna do is add a tiny one because it looks like it comes out a bit. You know what we're gonna do is just pull this out. Sorry, see, when you don't plan things out too well, you gotta just like try things and see what works. But what I'm gonna do is just extrude this out a bit. Grab all these faces to make sure they're nice and flat. And this can be my little hole. So it's gonna act as this one. And then we can just bevel some of these edges. Here we go. And this edge on the inside. So I smooth it. It kind of looks like that shape we have. Hole might be too big, but I think that works. And then for this one on the top, I'm honestly not sure what this is. Let's see what our other rough image looks like. Okay, so it's like the same thing. So you know what we're gonna do is use this one up here. Delete this. We're gonna duplicate these up here for this one. And this bottom one is not gonna have a hole. I like variety in my models just to make it look interesting so they all don't look identical to one another. So I like how this one has a hole. You can add some bump onto this piece later on in Substance, like with those little rivets on the outside. This one can be normal, like so. Actually, let's make this a little bit thinner. Okay, that looks cool. Let's do that, and then for these ones, they're basically the exact same thing, but they have these like little loop things going through. So we can actually do the same thing. Let's use this as our, I like using this as like the base where the holes are. And then we can have another cylinder that's coming out of it. So let's snap it, shrink it down, drag it out, and let's add a nice bevel. Or let's see our other rough. What's it looking like? Yeah, just like a simple cylinder. So sometimes if you just do a bevel and you smooth it, you kind of get a bending effect. And if you add an extra edge loop right behind, it keeps it nice and straight. I don't know if that makes sense, but nope. Okay, so this is looking good. Let's make this a lot smaller. And then we just have this random piece. Now they're obviously look different in both, but depending on what you want it to look like. Trying to decide how we want this to look. How do we want to do this? There's so many different ways. So you know what? I'm going to use this, I guess. Let's try this. I'm just basically starting off with the shape that we had. So this can be our first loop. And this can be the second one. Maybe that's too small. I'm trying to figure out these rings. How big would they be? They look kind of small, the holes, to be honest. So maybe we'll do something like this, and they're lower as well. Okay, we'll do something like that. So what I'm gonna do is just mesh combine, bridge, add an edge loop in the middle, and we can kind of create this look, this shape that we have. So we got, so it's like this right now, and it kind of comes up. All right, so one sec here. Basically, these are gonna come up. Like so. And what we can do is just drag these ones. Oh. In Preview Smooth, I'm just kind of seeing how this shape is. We want to create something similar to the reference. It doesn't have to be exact. I think something like this might work well. So I can grab all these outside faces, give it some depth, some thickness. Actually, what we're going to do, because I want clean geometry on the other side, that we're just going to take this and we're going to duplicate it on the Z-axis this time. So duplicate special, we want to flip it over to the Z, apply. So now I have both these. I can merge them or combine them into one mesh, take both of these edges on both sides, and then just bridge them together. And I can control delete to delete those edges. Now we have a thick object, same geometry on both sides. And then we can add a really tight edge loop if I want on both to make it look nice. Now, I think there's like a square at the top. We're just gonna, they look different in both refs, so I feel like we can't go wrong with either right now, but we're just gonna play around with it to get something that we're happy with. Just maybe something like this, not as much actually. We're just playing around with the shape. So let's give this mix a little thicker so I can actually grab it. Let's move this up so it aligns roughly with our shape. So it looks like it sits pretty close. And I want these to be closer. So I'm gonna hit 3. It looks nice. Select these. That looks good. I think it just needs to honestly be a lot bigger. Sometimes things look good up close and you zoom out and then you realize how small they are. And you're like, that's not right. All right. This should be better. Let's bring these together a little bit more. Okay, so that looks better. Save. Let's drag this down now. And what we can do is just add like, let's simplify it. We are going to make a pole with another cylinder so it looks like it goes right through the thing. Something like so. What do you guys think? Too bad I can't hear what you guys think, but I think this will work. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be too focused on the details on the back. So that should be fine. And I also just want to make it so it's not perfectly straight down, because nothing is ever perfect. And the more variation you can have, the better. So what we're going to do is actually change the pivot point to the center of this. And I can just rotate it to be crooked like the one that we have in our ref. And I'm going to take these and group them. And I'm just going to duplicate it. Oh, not that. Let's take all of this. Group it. Control G. Then Control D to duplicate it. Then we can rotate it to be over here. And we can roughly ballpark. I'm not going to worry too much about where it is, but I think something like this works well. We can honestly make them probably both bigger. So we can go to our outliner since they're grouped, select these two groups, and let's just enlarge them. So it looks like they're actually quite large. We can bring this out a little bit. I think that works. We can do a wind here, and this one can be our top one. I think that should work. So now we just have this bottom piece to worry about. And for this one, I think we're going to create a nice Boolean for it, because why not? I think that will make sense. What shape do we want to use? I'm not too sure. I think we're just going to use a cube, oddly enough. Honestly, there's so many different approaches depending on how you want, what you want to do, but let's do this. Okay. So I'm going to add an edge loop right in the middle. Let's drag these down. And let's drag these ones out a little bit. So I'm just going to add an edge loop directly in the middle of those. Basically what I'm trying to do is just get this rounded look that I want, like this. And I think I'm just going to do it just like this. And call me crazy, but I think it's just going to work well. And we want it to be rounded, so like I was thinking originally. Now, to be honest with you, I probably should have done this with a torus. It's just the first thing that jumped to my mind. We can go to transform constraints to go to edge. We can just drag those in a little bit to make it nice and round. This is obviously too round. We don't want it too round. Something like this should do. So let's say this is fine. I'm not being too picky. Let's just bring this down a little bit. Okay, so what we can do is take this shape and let's just smooth it out once. Let's take our shape here. Once again, shift, select our other one, mesh, Boolean, difference, B to A. Oh, we don't want it to be preview smooth, so we want to make sure we're not in preview smooth. Then let's do that. Mesh to create that little cutout. And let's delete our history. And we should have added a loop ahead of time just to make our lives easier, but we didn't make our lives easier. So what we're gonna do, we should have added a nice little loop like this before. So if you're following along, I would do that before you do the Boolean. Let's just manually, very roughly add that. Let's go ahead. Okay. So like usual, target weld tool. Let's go ahead and let's target weld our unnecessary edges here. So this one. There'll be a lot of them. You can just go everything to this one. And these two, all these edges. Okay, that should work. And what we're gonna do is add one more around. So holding control, I'm just gonna add, I just want more polys to work with so I don't have to stretch these UVs or these poly super far to reach the corners. And if people are freaking out already, don't worry, it's okay to add triangles around booleans. I never have issues. Obviously, if for like maybe character animation, it might be a different story, but we don't do character animation here, so it's going to be okay. But I know sometimes people see triangles that instantly think, oh my god, that's awful, because you know in school they do teach you you want everything in quads, which is correct technically, right? Like, but it's okay. Let's just delete these, we don't need those. And take these and just extrude them. And we're looking good. What we're going to do is just simplify these two, get to the center. Okay, so we have this shape. Let's just now create a little bit of depth and a tiny extrusion, and we can add a very small bevel to the outside edge. So now when I hit 3 on my keyboard, we're kind of getting this hole that this thing tends to have. Now it is looking a little bit big, so we can just drag this down. To kind of match our look we're going for. And just basically eyeballing it, seeing what looks good, what doesn't. As you can see, these ones look like they're just too low. So we can just roughly adjust that. And you can spend more time obviously cleaning up if you really want to, but there is a little tiny stick that comes out of this thing. For some reason it's not looking how I want it to. Let's just give this a little. Oh, it should work fine. Let's go back to our cube we just created, and I can just create that tiny little stick by just scaling in a little cube. And I'm not sure what this is for either. It would help to know exactly what these pieces are for, of course, before you make them. If you want to do a little bit of research, it'll probably help the modeling out, but I think it just sticks out like this. That's my guess. I could be wrong. All you clock experts out there, go easy on me, but I think that'll work. And I also do like these little points out here. It kind of makes it look a little interesting. I kind of like that. What do you think? Just to give it a little bit of shape, I think that's cool. Okay, so we have our clock basically done. Now one thing I want to do is just add a little bit of angle to this thing. So I'm going to select all of these inside components, minus the feet, so holding shift, I can deselect objects, so all these upper components, this arm, I can take all of these and group them. So all of these are going to be, I'm actually going to keep the groups. So right now if I group them, because I select them, they're not going to group. For example, I'll just group them. It's going to take them out of these groups. Now these are not grouped like they originally were. So what I can do is just control, select these groups that I want to stay together, and then I can group them. So now I can still select this. Oh, where is it? No, it didn't work. One sec. I would have to go back. So I can select these objects and everything else with it. There we go. I think that's everything I want. I want my face. What's this? That's the top. So I can group these now. Now I actually have my group. Oh, it's not. What's happening? Oh yeah, the groups are still together. I want those together. So now we have this. So what I can do is I honestly think it's tilted back a tiny bit. So we're going to open up our floor. That floor shape that I had. I'm not sure where it is. Oh, unnecessary. I think it's in my, oh, here it is, floor on the top. Unhide this. Let's just look at our clock. It looks like it's tilted back a little bit. Is it? Is it not? I don't know. Maybe I'm tripping. I don't know. What we're going to do is just angle it slightly. I think it's angled a littlest bit. And what we're going to do is bring this to meet the bottom of our clock. And these feet are actually going to go, I'm going to shrink them down a bit and raise them up until those just touch as well. Here we go. So now that's hitting the side. These feet are also closer to the front, it looks like. Yeah, they're definitely closer to the front. So let's do something like that. Maybe that's too much. Maybe these should be tilted a little bit. What do you think? It's hard to say. I think that works. Now, a couple other things, if you want it to look more realistic, is nothing is ever perfectly straight. So we can actually take this, for example, and we can just rotate it a bit. Maybe we go the opposite way to help hide. And then we can just rotate this up. Just changing the angle of things so nothing looks perfect. In this whole shape we had. Just mess around with the shapes until it looks good, at least in your opinion. Whoa. Not sure what happened here, but we can just take this group we have and we can just duplicate it over. Not sure what happened there. We can just delete these ones. All right, so we have our clock. Now, I always like to add a few personal elements if you can to make it look kind of fun. So I'm going to quickly Google here, 1 second. So I thought it'd be fun to add some sort of sale sticker or something on the back just to help make it feel something a little more unique or custom. I always like to add personal touches to it if you can. So what we're going to do is add 2 things. So I'm going to add a tiny sale sticker, like one of those stickers that show the price, and we can make it like a little worn out. So what we'll do is just delete the back face because we don't need that, of course. Let's make it really thin. And let's just like put it on somewhere like this. And what we can do is just bevel these edges to make it round. And then if you smooth it out, you tend to get some cool results, something like this, which should look cool. that'll be like our sale sticker on the back. And then yeah, maybe that's about it. Just like a little sale sticker or something. All right, so we have our clock. We can delete our floor. And our model's basically done. I'm just gonna look over it really quick to see if there's anything that looks like it should be different. I almost think, I don't know if it's sitting a little wide. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. It's kind of hard to tell. But I think this will work fine. So one thing I do want to, so I'm debating with myself right now if I want to increase the polys more for our high poly mesh. Or if I just want to smooth those edges and have it, well, we'll just fake it. There's no point. I don't think there's a real point in smoothing, because I was thinking is adding another subdivision so we can make it like that, like really smooth. Maybe that will be for a really high poly mesh. I don't know. I didn't really think about how I was planning to do this, but all right, we have our model basically done, I think. I think I want to take these arms, group them. Change the pivot point to the center here. And all I'm going to do is just scale this up a tiny bit. I kind of want them to be bigger. I want this middle piece to be bigger, which means that these arms can just shrink down a tiniest bit. It's good to figure all this stuff out, of course, before you move on to the UVs. I'm just moving a couple little things around. We're going to use that to stamp on our mesh, right? So I want to make sure that those are looking pretty good too. But I think that will work. I just want to bring these out a little bit. And the reason why I'm bringing these out a tiny bit more is it'd be cool to get some shadow going underneath these. All right, now a couple of things really quickly. If you were truly looking for a low poly mesh, there's a bunch of things we could do differently. None of this could just be an image, all these arms. Maybe we'll do another one beside it that's actually lower in poly, just to show the difference, because you know it is going to be fairly high in polys at the moment, but I think it looks cool. It's going to be fun. Okay, I think that's fine. So the modeling is basically finished. Now we need to move on to the UVs so we can UV this, get it prepared for Substance Painter. Now one quick thing we're going to do as well is just take this front face. I'm going to duplicate it. We can just assign the original Lambert mesh just so I can see it better. And we're going to move the glass to go a little bit closer. I think it's just underneath where this edge sits. So there's an edge here that bends in. I'm just going to put this glass right below. So technically once, let's just add quick material to show. So blend transparency. I can actually just make it so that will be where our glass sits. We can add some cool effect to it or something. Maybe fit a little deeper in. Like that. Okay. I think that works. So what we're going to do is move on to the UVs, and then we can prepare this thing for texturing. So that's the whole 3D modeling process. Like I said, lots we can cut back on. Got this whole thing out if we want a low poly mesh. Didn't have to smooth any of the pieces, but just showing you the whole workflow in the pipeline to hopefully make it more clear to more beginners exactly how all these pieces fit together. So now that we have the modeling done, before we jump into those UVs, I just quickly want to give a shout out to this week's video sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay offers a variety of services ranging from PCB production, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, 3D printing, and much more. You can quickly upload your own files and get a quote immediately. So if you're building something at home or want to print one of your own 3D models, PCBWay makes it extremely easy to get custom parts for your projects, even if you don't have the necessary tools. They take care of everything so you can get those parts shipped directly to your front door. So if you're working on a project or need 3D printing or any of these other services, make sure to check them out in the description below. And once again, thank you PCBWay for sponsoring this week's video. So what I like to do first before anything is just basically take this whole object. Well, I like to highlight everything in my scene and just delete history first. And as you can see, I'll delete some objects on the side. It didn't in this case because empty folders will be deleted, and it just helps clean things up. Same with freezing transforms, freeze those transforms as well. So everything's nice. I'm going to move this reference to the side so we don't need it right now. And what I'm going to do is just take all of these objects we have, move it to our high poly. And I'm just going to duplicate it. Sometimes I like duplicating them over ahead of time, so I have something in case things go wrong. You can jump back to the original model. But let's start at the top of our list. So we have these legs first. So let's just triple check to make sure we're happy with how the shape is looking, which I think we can just refine the tiniest bit. At this point, it's all about just making things look the way you want them to before you finalize stuff. But I think that's probably good. I'm trying to decide if I want where I want these legs to fit, but I think something like this will be fine. Because I find if you want realism, it's never creating a seam between the two materials really helps. So for example, maybe bringing this down, then extruding this in. Can help create a little bit of a seam there, like a little bit of a bump. If you look from an angle, it kind of bends into it, so it actually looks like it goes into something rather than this side just goes directly straight into the geometry. So creating that little gap, you can also add a little bit of black, like dust or something, and later on the texture to help emphasize that. But I think this is good. So let's go ahead. We're going to smooth this. So I can press 1 now and not preview smooth it. And since this is a higher poly mesh, we're going to take this one. I'm just going to add one more bevel to it to make that nice and round, just because we're going to go for something that looks a little bit more realistic. So we're going to do the UVing process, which is the same for every single shape. So we're going to delete history, center pivot, freeze transforms. To start, I'm going to go up to UV and do a camera-based projection. And that's going to basically remove all the cuts. So all those little white lines are now gone, and I have a clean model to work with. So let's isolate this, focus on it by pressing F. And we need to make our cuts now ourselves. So I'm going to do this with the 3D Cut and Sew UV tool, which is up here. I dock it to the top of my bar, but you can find it under the UV tab. Go down to 3D Cut and Sew UV tool. Click on that, right click, go up to Component and Edge. We can start double clicking on the edges wherever we want to make our UV cuts. So I like doing them obviously along hard edges. So we're going to do one right along here. And when the colors change, you know they're separated. And I'm going to separate it on the bottom as well. And we're going to do one cut at the back. And we're going to do one cut up the whole thing at the back as well. And I'm choosing the back. So if I unhide this, I'm making that cut on this angle where it's going to be hard or more difficult to actually see that cut. So you're not going to see any weird patterns in the UVs. You always want to make those cuts near the back of objects if you can. So I'm going to select all of these shells, Control U on my keyboard to unfold, and Control L to lay them out. Now this obviously is not straight, and we're going to go over actually a little UV trick if you want to straighten up these little shells. Because right now, for example, if I actually use Straighten UV's tool here, it's not going to work too well because it's curved. So what we can do is go on with this Optimize tool and the Unfold tool. So if I click the Optimize tool, I can start bending this by doing like wax on, wax off. I don't know if you've ever seen Karate Kid. Basically doing circles to kind of straighten it out. If I go to the Unfold tool, sometimes it actually works better if you shrink them down. Go to the Unfold tool, I'm going to do that. See how it starts unfolding it in that direction? Now I can press the straighten UVs tool again. And I can go back to the UV, the same process kind of over and over again. We're going to keep doing that until I have a nice, let's go to the optimize tool to optimize these end pieces, straighten again. And boom, just like that, we have a nice straight UV shell. And you have to be careful with this, of course, because if the shape is truly curved, you don't want to necessarily straighten everything, but you know, it does help you fit more UV shells into your UV editor if the shells are nice and straight. So we can change the rotation, Control L to lay them out. I just click the shading because I like them all blue. And this one leg is done. So what I can do is I'm just going to duplicate it, slide it over, hold J. Now, if I do it like this UV cut we made on the front is going to be on the front. So I'm just going to use the duplicate special tool, which we already went over. So I'm just going to duplicate special, make sure it is on the X axis. So it's minus it on the X and duplicate this over. And what we can do is just find the right spot for this to fit. So let's delete this. That looks good. It's roughly in the right spot. Now I can go into my outliner, I can select these 2 feet that I just made, and I'm going to group them together since I know that they're grouped. I'm going to call them legs, or they're rather feet. I'm going to highlight these shells. I'm going to shrink them down and just move them to the side. I like using all of my real estate here as just different areas to organize your UV shells, so later on when we start stacking them all together in this 0 to 1 space, it's just easier for me to figure out where they all are. Also, these are sharing the same UV space, so I don't want them, if I laid them out, for example, right now, it would separate them, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you can stack your UV shells to save space, it's always a good thing and a good habit to get into. So we have our feet done. I'm just going to take these and freeze transformations again. As you can see, the translates are all off. Now what's going to do is make one of them red, and that's just because one of them is technically flipped, but that's okay. Don't be scared of the red, it's okay. So let's move down the list. Next is this top piece. So let's isolate it to see what we're dealing with here. And we can probably preview smooth it to see how it looks smoothed. I like how that's looking. So let's go ahead and let's actually add a smoothing effect. So mesh, smooth, press 1 to not preview smooth it. And this is now how the shape looks. Looks cool. Let's delete history, center, freeze transformations. And let's do the same thing. 3D cut and sew UV tool. As you can see actually right now, the UVs are destroyed. So we need to go UV, camera based to clean everything up. Let's go to the 3D cut and sew UV tool, component edge. And let's double click that top piece. Now, to be honest with you, that's probably all we really need. I'm going to do one cut along the back. Now, it would be cool to actually have, we're going to try something. Since we're here, we're this far. It might be fun to actually have a Boolean in this to make it look that much more realistic. I don't know if it's worth it. We might just be making a lot of unnecessary work for ourselves, but I think it might look cool. So this can go over more. So back to where we were, made a cut along the back, cut on the top. I can highlight all of those shells, Control U, Control L. Roughly straighten it. That's good. Let's call this, I don't know, top stick. I have no idea. All right, next is going to be this thing, the cover that we have here. Now, one thing I don't like when I preview smooth it is you're getting this effect. So we're going to take this and just raise it up the tiniest bit to help reduce that stretching look. So we're going to smooth it out and see if it actually fixes itself. which it didn't really, so we're going to Control Z. What I'm going to do is just take this top edge and I'm just going to bevel it once. What that's going to do is just help let's go to object mode. Oh, I can just pull this down a bit. I want it to be a little bit more rounded. That looks a little bit better. What do you guys think? I think that will work. Maybe a little too much. So what I can do is just select these faces on the top. So all I'm doing right now is just, honestly, I'm just adjusting it just depending on how much of a curve I actually want on this top piece, because it looks a little bit flat. I think that works much better. All right, so now we can add a smooth. I just needed an extra edge on the top to help support it. I think that will work well. So I can isolate this now. Let's delete history, center, freeze transformations, camera base projection. Let's go to that 3D cut and sew UV tool. And we're gonna do one cut on the bottom and leave that. So it's just two pieces, Control U, Control L, and the top's done. Let's call it top the bell. I think it's a bell sort of thing. All right, torus, it's just pretty straightforward. We can just rotate this up so it's not intersecting with our bell piece. Looks like it's just sitting on top, which is nice. And this already comes UV'd, so we just need to highlight it. Control U, Control L. Nice and easy. Delete the history. And if we want, we can add a nice smoothing effect to make it really nice and smooth. Not needed. We're gonna do it because it's fun. Top ring. All the top pieces. All right, our helix, which also comes UV'd. So we just highlight it, unfold, level it out. And our next one on the list is our sticker. So this is our sticker. Let's go mesh smooth. The reason why I'm smoothing this is just to add an extra curvature. I find stickers are never really that flat. In fact, you can grab some using the soft select by pressing B on your keyboard and dragging. You can just drag some corners in more than others, or add a tiny bit of a fold. So it looks like one side's kind of picking up a little bit. I think that's fine. And this is a UV camera base. We can just leave this as is and just do an unfold. That will be fine. We'll stamp on a texture, even though actually if you wanted to fix it to be a little bit more straight, you can add some tiny cuts on these corners here. Oh. Now if I unfold it, it'll just be a little bit more straight and avoid any warping. Okay, so those are all done. Let's move on to the main body group. And what's this? This is the top stick. We already have something called top stick, so this will be the other stick. Let's zoom in on it. I'm going to add, I pressed 1 to get out of the preview smooth, and then I'm going to actually add the smoothing effect. And same with this one, G, just to repeat the same process. So we have our two shapes, and we can go ahead, just making sure it looks not too low for how high everything is. Delete history, center, freeze transformations, UV camera base projection. Let's do, because it's very thin, I'm just going to do one cut basically on the bottom and in the middle. So when I unfold it, I'm going to have just two pieces. I'm just going to make, let's not overcomplicate the shape. And for this front one as well, Same process, delete center, freeze transformation, UV camera base, using that 3D cut and sew UV tool. We are going to do a cut along the bottom here. And let's do one here. And this could probably just stay as one. And I think it's best to just do one up the side, just so we don't get too much stretching. It's gonna be metal, or it's not gonna, there's not gonna be any warping, it's gonna be fine. Okay, so we have our top stick. So actually let's just unfold these together so the sizing is proportioned to one another. And let's save. And we have our feet. Smooth up. Okay, so we just have our body next. Let's isolate this and go back. Start at the very top of our list. So the very top is this one, like actually one of these little back pieces. So let's just UV this one. We can duplicate it over to create the other side, which is going to be make our life a little bit easier. Make sure we're happy with how the shape is looking, which I think it's fine. Not gonna be too picky. We do need to smooth it though, so let's add a smoothing. And because it was so low, like I talked about at the beginning of the video, because this edge, if I Control Z, is so low in poly, I could have almost, what you can do if you're trying to, here, let's do that actually. I'm gonna add one in the center of both of these. You can grab these two, change the pivot so it's directly in the center, and I can just scale those to add a little bit more curvature. So I'm sure now if I actually added a smoothing effect, one subdivision looks much better than previously. And we're not going to do that. I don't really care, but if you're trying to save on polys and still work with subdivisions, having a very low poly at the beginning is not always easier. Because now when we actually add that smoothing effect, I need to basically, what I'm gonna do is just manually adjust these first, because this is gonna make things look off a little bit. And now we can go ahead and add one more to smooth it out. Looks better. It's obviously really high in polys, so there's things we can do. Oh, and I forgot to actually merge these together. That's hilarious. Bridge. And bridge. Now it does create a lot of unnecessary polys smooth, so I do recommend going in and just deleting a lot of unnecessary things that you don't need, like edge loops. And there's lots you can do in here as well, like around the edges. It'll just save you. We're not going to go crazy, but it's just something to keep in mind. Obviously when you smooth, it does increase the polys a lot. So, all right, delete, center, pivot, freeze transformation, UV, camera based, 3D cut and sew UV tool. Let's do a cut around the outside, and let's cut around the inside. Let's do the same thing for the other side. And let's do two cuts so these can be nice and straight. And let's do the same thing here. That should work well. And let's do some cuts on the top. Let's just separate these. And maybe let's do just one on the bottom. Just the reason why is just so none of the UV shells are really large. This strip would be very long. It would I would have to make all the other shells small to fit them all. So if I make more cuts, all the shells can be bigger all together because the shells are more accurate in size to one another. Hopefully that makes sense. But that looks good. This shell can definitely be straight just to help. Actually, all of these could be straight. Pressing G just to repeat the last move on my keyboard. And the reason why I'm straightening these is just going to allow me to fit them together that much tighter, which always saves you more room. Delete the history on that. And let's go to this next group. So this one has this weird little indent. So if I unsmooth it, unpreview smooth, actually add a smoothing modifier onto it. Looks cool. It's already pre-cut for me actually, so you can just unfold. Add a straighten around this bottom shell. It's good to go. This one as well. So this is mesh smooth. And this, we don't need to add any cuts because it's so small. We can do a camera-based projection and just unfold it. All right, so we have we have this last cylinder in here, which we can actually highlight all the shells, deselect the middle ones. Make sure you click in here. So I'm holding Alt and just zooming out really quick. And if you're clicked off of your UV editor, you can actually just delete, and those outside faces will actually just be deleted because I selected them in my UV editor. If I select something in my UV editor here and I press Control Delete, nothing will delete, and you have to click in this 3D space. So it's a little weird, but we have that pull done. So now this whole piece is done. We can actually just change the rotation and Control L to lay them all out together. So this is back piece 1. Delete. Oh, delete history. Freeze transforms. Edit duplicate special. And we can drag this one to the other side. And let's take this other group we have and delete it. So then we have these which are sharing the same UV space. We can actually group these together, which I like to do. Move it to the side. And we can move on to our other one. So this we can delete too. We don't need that little stick. What do we got next? All right. So what I'm going to do is basically, I'm going to just, it's going to be glass. I'm just going to hide it for a sec. These are all going to be my group, my arms. It's going to be the face. So I'm just trying to organize right now to figure out what's what. So these, sometimes I like doing this just to make my life easier. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to just group all of this together as the back. This can be the body or the shell. And then these are all going to be, so if I delete history, it's going to delete those groups. I didn't, so that's fine. I can just delete these. Be careful when you see transforms are hidden. It's nice just to make sure history is deleted. Sometimes that just removes the groups automatically. In this case, it didn't, but it's not going to delete anything, so we're fine. So now I have things is organized a little bit better. So let's start with the body. I'm going to isolate it. So I'm just going to leave this as is. I know we can obviously add another subdivision if we wanted to really smooth it out, but I don't think we really need to. I'm just going to UV camera base. I'm just going to use a 3D cut and sew UV tool. We can add a cut along the top here. Separate those. I'm going to do a cut along the bottom. And honestly, we can keep this just as one large shell, which I think works best for a shape like this. And we have the face, which is the face. That's pretty straightforward. And we have the glass, which also is pretty straightforward. We just have the arms to do. So let's start with this bottom one, which is looking good. I just want to double check that everything's fine. What I don't like is just this. So we're going to double click these, unselect the outside, so I have both sides selected, and I can just bridge those together. And that can be like a point. Actually, we can add an edge loop on the very end, so when I smooth it, it just helps retain that edge a little bit more. Maybe we just make this a little bit thinner as well. Something like that should work. Then we can actually add a smooth to it to add a little bit more detail if we want, if you're looking just for more realism. is actually we can extrude this in to get close and then add a little bit of depth here. I like to do this sometimes just to add more shadow around, so now it looks like that this kind of goes in, if that makes any sense. These aren't perfectly spaced, so I'm not getting a perfect circle. So what we can do is just select this edge and go circularize. G, just to help make that perfectly circle. So it looks a little better. There we go. So this looks good. Let's mesh smooth. We're gonna add 2 as well, just to make it look nice and smooth. I really like that curvature. Obviously, a game ready model, you would have 2 meshes. So you can make this, like I said, to be honest with you, this can be all just one image. You don't have to have any arms in here. So there's lots you can do depending on how the model is going to be used. And if it's for a video game, that's honestly what I would do. So camera-based projection. And let's decide how we're going to cut this. So what I'm going to do, because it's a little bit of a strange shape, is one cut along the front, one cut along here. So I'm going to click one side, holding shift, I can double click the other side to do a cut, and then I'll do a cut here. Cut, hold shift, cut. Click one, hold shift, double click. So I'm going to separate that as its own piece. And I didn't realize I completely messed this up. So I have to Control Z this because I didn't realize I had some geometry missing, which is never good. So let's just fix this really quickly. What I'm going to do is go, I'm going to select these 2. Extrude, select them both, extrude, and extrude. And all I can do is just merge. Circularize to make them actually circular. There we go. Now we can go UV camera-based projection. We can now go mesh smooth to actually add a smoothing effect to it. Now it's looking better, so let's redo that. Let's isolate this object. I'm going to do a little cut on the inside, separate this. Then I'm going to do a cut along this side, so this is all one piece. And then same thing that I did before. I'm just going to do it a little bit further back, actually. I'm going to do one here to here. And we can do one just up the back. So now if I unfold it, I get all these shells, which is looking fine. What's this piece? Oh, we're good. Straighten these, straighten the inside one. And then we can just unfold it and lay it out. So we have this one done. And now, let's go. We just have this, so I'm just going to delete all the back part. Go mesh smooth. And it's already pre-cut for us. All the cylinders are, so we can just leave that as is. Alright, except for I don't want cut here, so camera based, we're not going to do what Maya wants. We're going to actually make our own cut. Straighten, lay those out. Cool, so we have our bottom arm, so we can actually group these. Bottom. This I can duplicate this one up in the position of this one. And this one's gonna be a little bit bigger. I think this one's bigger. If it's not, it is now. Okay, so we can actually hide that really quick just so I can select these other objects and delete them, since they're just placeholders. These are actually sharing the same UV space. I'm just moving some shells around to make room. So these are actually sharing. So I'm just gonna group them up into their own group. That way I know that they're sharing the same UV space. And we can move on to these other ones. So this one, same deal. We're going to mesh smooth. And I'm gonna add 2 subdivisions to it to make it nice and smooth. And then with this one, I can also, that's good enough. Try not to be too picky. Delete center freeze, camera base projection. Using that 3D cut and sew UV tool, I can go and do a cut all right along this edge to separate it. Ooh, we actually have this, which we forgot to do. So what we're gonna do is be lazy and just center it all. Merge it to the center. And that'll be fine. UV camera based. And what we can do is just do a cut along that edge. Cut along this edge. And same thing we did to the front one. I'm gonna do here to here, here to here. And one up the back. That way when I unfold it, things are looking nice and straight. And lay them out. This is not that straight. Let's straighten this a bit more. Okay, so this arm is done. And then we just need these 2. So let's isolate those. This one, I'm going to do same thing I did before actually. Going to just delete these, do a little extrusion, and then actually we're going to go most of the way. Might look cool if I let's make it round, just like we did before. That way it looks like there's a little bit of depth, and I think it'll just help add a little bit of realism. So let's mesh smooth, 2 subdivisions. Well, that looks cool. And the side's a little wonky, but it doesn't matter because you're not going to see it. So it works. So let's go UV camera base, delete all that jazz like we always do. And for this one, we can do, oh, same thing. I think I forgot the tip, right? Yeah, so we can just quickly do it the lazy way, merge it, redo that camera base projection. Let's do a cut along the top and one along the side. And you probably guessed it, we're gonna do just like we did to the other one. So we're gonna do a little cut. Oh. This one's not separated because I missed a little piece. And we can unfold and lay this thing out. Same with this one. We don't need this back face. To be honest, it's actually very far. Can move it up more. Unfold layout. All right, so we have our arms done. Let's just change this and lay these all out together. Which is nice. And then we just have the back. The back components are the last ones we got to do. So let's just save. Remember to save along the way. These are already UV'd, so what we need to do is just this one. So mesh smooth, UV camera based. That one's pretty straightforward. This one too, mesh smooth. And we can just UV camera based. Let's do a few cuts. Let's do one here, one there. And actually the reason why I'm going to do cuts here, a little bit in, because I'm going to add some rivet pattern on these. And I kind of want, I don't want that rivet pattern to go over to the edge. So I want that cut to be right before the curve actually starts. If that makes any sense. So I'm going to straighten G to repeat the process. So we have this one done. So we can just reuse this and duplicate, put it in the same position as this one. And it's hiding behind, so delete the other one. These are sharing the same UV space, so let's group them together, move them to the side. And this is just the last one we gotta do, so let's isolate it. Let's go mesh smooth, and same thing. Because we're going to have that rivet pattern, I want to do the cuts right before the edge. Cut on the bottom, cut on the inside, and one up the back. Okay, unfold, straighten these shells up. I'm hitting G just to repeat the process. So those rectangles are all nice and straight. And just like that, our UVing is basically done. So we need to organize these UV shells. Now we have the UVs actually done. We're not actually finished because we need to organize them. I'm trying to think if we should, what other things we can add to this. It might be fun to like, I'm gonna select these actually. Just the more I'm looking at my reference and realizing this is like, I don't know if it's just me, but it's like bent quite a bit. And I like the look of it being bent, I think. Something like that. Okay, well we have this last thing. Yeah, mesh smooth. And let's just do camera based. We're just going to do a one cut up the back. This is very not important, so it's fine. Okay. We have our UVing done, so now we just need to organize these UVs. So this can probably just be one texture because of the size. So what we're going to do is I like to just quickly, also this, I don't want the cut, I'm gonna rotate this because the cut's happening on the front. We don't want that, we want the cut to be at least on the back. So I'm just gonna rotate that around. And we can start fitting our UV shells together. So sometimes what I like to do is just organize the less important shells with the more important shells. So for example, this is, the body is pretty important. What do we not UV here? Oh yeah, this piece. Smooth, UV, camera based. I think we can just leave this as is. Just like that. That's perfect. Okay. I think that's everything for the back. Oh yeah, the stick. I'm just gonna do an automatic UV on this. Lay it out. Okay. So now we have all of that done. Let's just lay those out. These can be a little bit bigger. Now, obviously, because I'm laying everything out together, it's going to give priority to, it's going to make every size, the texel density equal in all the shapes. But to be honest with you, I don't want this to be so low in poly, especially these ones, because I'm adding like a pattern to it. I want these to be higher. So what we can do is just select these shells and just make them a little bit bigger. Depending on obviously what you want. Now, I'm being cautious with that advice because obviously your texel density is going to be not equal. So you have to like manually adjust the size of your shells for each shape that you want to be similar, which I'll show you later on in Substance, but just something to keep in mind that like these two in particular, I want these to be actually large. There we go. That way I'm going to have more detail on that pattern. Okay, so that's the back is done. The arms are all good. Let's move these to the side. And these, so I have the glass, which needs to be slid over because I don't want to have repeating pattern. And the glass can honestly be smaller. It doesn't need to be as big as our text is going to be. And we have the feet, and we have all of this stuff. All I'm doing is just moving the shells aside so I can see what I got going on. Move these over. Okay, so if I select them all, now what a lot of people end up doing is just selecting everything and laying them all out, which is fine. In fact, if I do that right now, I'll show you. If I lay them out, which will do a fine job, but it's trying to give, once again, the size, that texel density equal to all the components. So these little components are so small and look at all this wasted space. So we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is select the large objects that I want. This is actually something that I do sometimes. Why is this moved? Oh, just a texture. We're fine. Let's turn off the texture. We don't want any texture. So if I select what I'm going to do here is to select the largest objects that I have in my scene, because I know I want good detail on these, and we can lay these ones out. That way, like I said, it's going to just give me nice detail. Now on this face texture, I'm actually going to increase this one even more. This is our, I can change that, and I can select everything else now. So as you can see, I'm just giving priority to the more important object, which is, the back. I don't really care about the other ones as much. So sometimes when I'm manually adjusting mine, that will move these over depending. So like, for example, this one's pretty important. This one's pretty important, or these are actually very important. This is an important shell. So what I'm going to do is just add this here. This is the underneath shell. I don't think that's too important. We can actually shrink this down. So these are fairly important. This is fairly important. I kind of prioritize it. Feet are very small, not important. So I'm going to move the not so important objects to the side. Then the sticks, and this is my, once you can move them, see, oh, these are tiny ones, so these are really small. These are all my arm components. Let's move these into the UV editor. This doesn't have to be as big. And then we can move in my arms. All I'm doing is just adjusting this. So as you can see, all I'm doing here is just moving shells around, trying to fit them all in, giving the priority to the more important shells, because I want detail on the important ones. So actually, let's just do, yeah. Let's do that. So I'm just trying to fill in the space as efficiently as I can. This one's pink because we never duplicated special, so it's okay, but what I'm gonna do is do one in here and one up here. And then this little ball thing, I'm just gonna enlarge the shell on this because it's a ball thing on the end, whatever you call it. And I want a little bit of detail. With little feet, let's move these here. Find a spot. And we have all of our smaller components, which are still important, especially the ones that I mentioned we want. So I can select these UV shells, like these two. I want to keep these ones big. Because we want to add that pattern to it, so I want them to be fairly large. And let's start filling in some spots here. So I'm trying to think what's the best spot. I mean, you can just throw them in anywhere, really, but just looking for empty spots that I can fill in. Obviously, we can throw them in really anywhere, but I'm trying to pick good spots so I'm not just like wasting space. I mean, these aren't really not that important, so I don't have to worry about keeping the shells too big, but we did it fairly quick. So we have our UVs organized now. So all I can do is right click this, add a material to it. I'm just gonna add a blend. We're gonna call this clock text or clock texture. All right. So our UVs are done. Our model is complete. Now we just need to export this thing. We can jump over to Substance and we can start our texturing. Now what I'm going to do is just add, we're not doing the high and low poly model workflow, so something like this would be fine if you have a higher poly mesh. Since this is one mesh we're working with and it's looking, we're just going to add one more smoothing to it. I think that's good though. Let me know what you guys think. So what we're going to do is now export this thing. I'm just going to enlarge this to go into the geometry, which is my glass. Bring it back a bit. There we go. All right. So let's export this thing. Let's jump over to Substance Painter and we can start our texturing. All right, so now that we have our clock ready for export, there's a few small things we have to do to prepare for our textures when it comes to graphics and specific patterns or labels we want to make for our clock. And the most important thing is obviously the face. It's pretty important because without the face, we wouldn't have any of the numbers. So what I did really quickly was jump onto Google Images, and I just found an orthographic or fairly orthographic image of a clock that I liked. And originally it came in just like something like this. Now, if you were looking at our reference photo, I really liked the clock look on the bottom. I don't know why, I just really liked it. So I ended up finding another image of one online of a similar, this one, which I liked. So I basically just took this, rasterized it, select inverse, and I just deleted the outside so I could have just this little piece that I liked. And I basically positioned this, oh, we have to get rid of this one too, roughly where I thought was fitting for the camera. And then I basically could just take this and increase the levels to make it somewhat fit in, something like that. And then maybe add in a little bit of a sharpen as well, like a smart sharpen, just to help sharpen it up so it's similar to the other image. So I basically just created my background. Now, you can obviously create your own. If you're a great graphics artist, I'm sure you can do that pretty quickly and have really nice results. But if I wanted something really fast, in which case I wanted for something like this, is I went in with my clone stamp and I just basically removed this arm. So I went through, I'm just gonna do this really quick. I spent a little bit more time, honestly not much time at all, but I just went through and as you can see, just really quickly removed it. Spent a little bit more time cleaning it up around the edges. That way I can have, and same with these ones actually. I also removed these ones. So that way I can have an empty dial, like no dial, no arms on it. That way I can add them on myself with geometry. Excuse me, sorry. So at this point, all I have to do is just export this as a graphic. I think you kind of get the idea. I just basically made my own custom label. And you do that for any other label you want, but we're just going to worry about just this one. So now that I have this saved, we can drag this in as a texture and I can just paste this directly onto my clock face. So now that my textures are prepared, all we have to do is jump over to Substance Painter and we can actually start our texturing. All right, so now I have Substance Painter open. All I have to do is go File, New, go ahead and select my clock FBX that I exported from Maya, and leave everything else as is. We can press OK. So now that our clock is loaded into the scene, there's just a few things we have to do. We have a transparent glass that's actually sitting on top that we need to make transparent. So we need to change the shader in here from Metal Rough to Metal Rough with alpha blending. So we need that alpha channel. So let's click this so we can switch it over. And when you switch this, when you come down to your texture set settings, you'll notice how now when you add a channel, you can actually add an opacity channel along with an emissive channel. But opacity is the important one that we're looking for. So we're going to add that channel to our texture set. So we can delete this layer. It's a blank layer. We can go ahead to our baking, either up here to baking or edit. mode bake mesh maps. So I can't talk today, apologize. And then we can go ahead and start baking out our texture. So I'm going to increase the output size to 4K. I'm going to use low poly mesh as high poly mesh since we only have one mesh that we're working with. And everything else should be fine. So let's go ahead and just bake out those textures. All right, so we have our baked mesh, our model ready to go. And I'm already seeing a little bit of an issue here on this back tag. So I'm going to quickly jump back into Maya. And the big reason why we forgot is that this UV shell, if I actually throw Maya on the screen, is sitting off our editor. This is a perfect real life example of I just missed this little guy here. Oh, the glass is also hidden, but the shell is not. So what we have to do is just fix this shell, our sticker shell. So I'm just going to drag this back into our scene. And this is actually, I'm kind of happy that this is happening because it's a really good example of how to fix random stuff that's happening. This stuff happens all the time. So we're just going to move this one that's not important. It's a non-really important shell. Let's move some of this around. So, let's drag all these shells. Let's make room for the sticker because I want this a little bit large since we're going to have a sticker on it. And then we can go ahead and move these back in to fit in our scene wherever they can fit without overlapping any other UV shells. So let's find a spot for this. I'm not really sure. Where can we fit this one? What is this? This is our feet, which is not really important, kind of important. We can move this. Let's move some stuff around. So what I'm going to do is just move this. Flip this around. We're going to move that here. Make this a little bit smaller. Put this here. And we can find now a spot for this. Keep jumping around until we're happy with it. So let's move this here. We can angle this one, which might help. You know what? We're actually going to change this. I'm going to put this here. This is fine here. I'm just going to break my rule of having straight UV shells just so I can slightly angle this. There we go. Okay, so now we have our shells. It's good to zoom out, make sure there's nothing else we're missing. So now I can grab this, let's re-export this thing, and let's jump back into Substance. So I exported it to this, just overwrote the same file. So all I have to do is go edit, re-import the mesh. And I just have to rebake it. So let's go back and let's rebake this. Now that shell should be actually positioned properly. Sometimes you don't notice things until you jump into Substance, so it's a bit of jumping back and forth until you realize everything is in the correct position. All right, so now that sticker's looking better. Now we can start our texturing. So one thing I like to do also right off the bat, depending on the camera, like the focal length you're actually trying to achieve, if there's any specific look, but I like to usually increase my focal length somewhere between either 35 or 50, to be honest, usually one of the two. 50 is obviously more accurate to what your eyes see in real life, so we're just gonna put this over to 50. I don't know why Substance always starts so low, but it does change the perspective of things. And anyways, it just looks better. So what we're gonna do right off the bat is just start off with our glass material, just so I can start visualizing things a little bit easier. And it's kind of hard when you can't see through. So I'm going to go to the Smart Materials, and I like to use this glass film dirty mirror texture that comes with Substance. We're going to drag that into our layers. I can right click this right away, turn it to a black mask, go to my polygon fill on the left, and I'm going to go to mesh fill. I'm going to click that glass mesh. So now it's a little bit see-through, not that see-through, so we can drop down folder, drop down, go to glass, and we can make the opacity a little bit more, less opaque, so we can actually see the inside a little bit more. Now, naturally, there is something with this, as you can see, it's like around the edges, which are actually like the dirt. So we're gonna actually leave this for now. I actually kind of like that, but maybe we just decrease that blackness just a tiny bit. Just a little bit too black. There we go. Just so there's a little bit of roughness, actually like that. We'll add more roughness on top of the glass in a second, but we can just call this the glass. So next is obviously what I always say in all my YouTube videos, if you follow along, is just fill in these empty meshes with some sort of material that we can start visualizing how things are looking. So we're not going to focus too much, stress too much about getting it perfect. We just want to start filling in these textures. So one big thing I want to just deal with right off the bat is that back texture, that one that we made ourselves in Photoshop. So all I'm going to do is just take my clock base that I exported already. I can drag this into my project. I'm going to set this as a texture into my current session. I don't want to save this for the future. We're going to add a plane layer, add layer, and I'm going to go over here to the projection. If I scroll down in my properties over here on the right until I find the base color, I'm going to drag this image I just imported over to my base color. As you can see, it jumped on, so I can align this with anything I want in my scene and just simply paste it right on my mesh. So what I'm going to do is, this is my UV shell. So sometimes I like to draw just to figure out which is a UV shell I want. And I can start positioning this over top. And we can, until it looks somewhat accurate, let's go a little bit smaller. And let's just paste this on and see how we're looking. Now we'll have to probably reposition. I'm just gonna paste it really quick. Just draw. Don't worry about any of the other shells. We can fix that. Click off just so I can start seeing now. It is a little bit big. Don't worry about the glasses because I painted on the glass. But it's looking just a little bit big. So we're gonna actually shrink in even more. And see if that's aligning with our... So as you can see, we aligned it in Maya, so you can tell by the black edge, it's a little bit to the right. So let's just go back and reposition it. Let's drag it over to the right a little bit more. That's probably better. And let's click off. It's looking it's looking pretty good. What we can do actually is just scale it back a bit. I want it to be a little bit larger. Not just trial and error until you're happy with it, but you know what? Let's go the opposite. I think what I want to do is go... Do I want to go this way? I'm trying to figure out if I need to shrink it or make it bigger right now. So we're just trying some stuff. See how it fits a little bit better. It's still a little bit too that way, so let's go a little bit more this way. That might be too much. Yeah, that was too much for sure. Let's go back. And it's difficult when you paste, obviously, because we have objects that are overlapping with these little things, these circles, that we it just takes a little bit of messing around until you're happy with the position of things. So I can even go more. All I'm trying to do right now is just seeing where these dots are. And even more, which... Oh, we're so close. I'm just gonna go back a little bit. That's pretty good. What if I zoomed in a little bit more? We're so close. Obviously the perfectionist in me is just trying to... Oh, I went the wrong way. That's the worst. Did I go the wrong way again? No, that looks good. Just a little bit up. Oh, that's not the way I want. I want the opposite way, right? Yeah. Lots of just jumping around. And 1 second here. I can fast forward so you don't have to see me keep going the wrong way. And now we're lined up, so now I can just go down a little bit more. Oh, so close. That's actually pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go ahead and let's just paste this thing on. I have buttons on the side of my mouse, so sometimes I hit them and it just jumps me out, which is really annoying. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Obviously, we can spend more time if we want, but for now, we can right-click this layer we just made. Let's go back to that polygon fill, and we're just gonna click just this one face. So we assign that texture only to that one face. Now it looks better. Now we have our clock. So next is, well, we have to do the hands. That's one thing. So let's just get that out of the way. We can remove this texture. Let's go back to our smart materials. And let's grab just like a regular metal, like steel dark. Let's just apply this for now. Black mask. And I can assign it to that mesh, to this one. And our little ones here, which are these things. All right, so we have our black hands. Those are cool. And what's next on our list? Basically, well, I guess everything else, but I want to fill in the middle. So let's go the middle of these little metal pieces. And I want it to be a little bit more like reflective and bright. The middle of these little things. It won't be too bright, but something like that might work. So let's right click, black mask, and polyfill, and we can just see which, that one and that one. Okay, so we have those middle pieces done now. So next on the list, well, we have the main body. To be honest with you, I'm still not sure. So I'm looking at this reference here, which I should bring on the page so you can see. It's like, I'm debating if I want to go chrome. Honestly, I don't think I want to go to silver. I think I want to add like more of a color, which would be kind of cool. Okay, so let's just add one of these smart materials to start visualizing it. So this one's cool. Some of these look so good just right off the bat. I swear, you still don't have to do anything. Let's go dirt. Let's drag down this dirt value. So I love using these smart materials. Some people feel like you shouldn't for some reason. I don't know. I've heard some people be like, it's cheating or something, but like, it's there to make your process easier. You should use these to your advantage, at least in my opinion. So don't feel like you can't use these. I would use them fully to your advantage. So let's add that, and maybe let's change the color. I don't want red, that's for sure. So nothing against red, but I don't know, maybe like we'll come back to the color for sure. I just want to throw something on right now so we can, maybe like a teal. For some reason, antique objects, I just think of teal right away. I don't know. Am I the only one? We'll do something like that for now. And it's looking too dirty in my opinion, so let's just bring the level of this dirt down a bit. And the grunginess, or was it top down? No, it's oh, it's this one, probably the leaks. Yeah, it is. The leaks, let's drag that one down as well. Cool. That's looking pretty good. So for this metal, it's looking a little bit bright, I'm not gonna lie, at least for my liking. So let's go back to the metal, and we can just make the metal a little bit darker. Maybe not that dark. I don't know. It's always tough to choose. Okay, leave it like that for now. So this, we can right click, go black mask, and let's assign it to the body and I guess to the top. I think that's everything. So I'm just looking on my other screen, but I think that works. Okay, so next are basically all the other components. Now this is gonna be pretty easy because they're all just one similar material. So I'm gonna use this bronze since I like the gold look. I think I might want to keep that. So let's just make this a lot darker and more on the gray side. Maybe not that gray. Something like that. Maybe so darn. Do I want it brighter? Do I not? I think a little bit brighter. Yeah, it looks cool. And for the back too, it looks pretty cool, but we're not going to make it as aggressive. So what I'm going to do actually is keep this for these components. Bronze, black mask, same thing, mesh fill. I'm going to click on the components that I want to add this to. Actually not add it to that. And the feet. And let's add it to these. Nice. Okay. I'm gonna add an iron forged, which honestly looks really nice on most things. I might want to make the bell a separate color like I do in my ref. I kind of like how this is like more worn. I don't know. We can try things, see what we like. But for now, let's just worry about the back. So I'm gonna do that bronze again. Let's go into here. Let's take off that surface detail. And that dirt, because I don't want, the dirt's not bad, but it's way too much. So we can drag this down. Or let's actually leave that up, but change down the curvature so it's not in the ambient. There we go. So the back looks pretty bright and reflective. So it might be fine to actually keep, let's mess around with some of this. So there's some roughness values in here we don't need. Let's delete that one. And there's like this roughness. And I feel like this could be, I don't know, more of a gray side. So in this, we're going to add another fill layer, and I'm going to change everything except for the roughness. We're going to add some different roughness value. So what I'm going to do is just drag on one of these like surface worn into the black mask. Sorry, delete that, add a fill layer. I'm going to leave all the channels on, add this on, just so we can see it. And we can make this a little bit more, maybe that's too similar. Let's do something different. So a lot of this is like just trial and error, right? Like throw something on, see how it's looking. I like the scratches actually, so let's just reduce it so there's not so many. And what we're going to do is just increase the height, or decrease it actually, to make it a little imprinted. And then we can increase the metallic. So basically what we're doing is just adding some scratches, some indents into it. So let's keep going. Let's add, no, we don't want the bronze to be just on this piece, not on our sticker. Okay, let's go to our sticker. So for the sticker, I found a random sticker online. So let's just drag that image in, just like we did with our front one. So current session. Label your layers, which I'm really bad at. So it's this one right up here. So what we can do is very similar, project it on. So we're gonna switch to our projection, go down to our sticker. It would have been easier if my sticker wasn't so large, but this will work. Do something like this. And paste that on. And it's looking a bit bright, so let's right click and go to levels, and we can just drag down the one a little bit. Let's make it darker. That's cool. All right, let's go back to our material here, and let's just mess around with our glass. So it's looking a little bit too clean. I don't know about you. So let's add a fill layer. We can just leave on the roughness value. So I can turn off all of these. And let's go over to our textures tab, which is right over here. And we can click on some pretty cool, well, depending on whatever you want for your roughness value on your glass. And this will help make the glass look more real. So let's use maybe a grunge leak, which is one I like, so I can throw that on, and you can suddenly see to tile it so it's not so big. The leak's not bad. Just tile it down. We'll have to mess with this opacity after when we jump into the render, and I'll show you what I mean. But this one I'm not too thrilled with. Let's go back to the color for a second. Maybe it's the color just throwing me off. So I can go back to my paint. Let's mess around with this color a bit more. There's more we can do in here, so we can add another fill layer on top and add different smart materials. So that scratching effect we had, you know, you can add more scratches if you really want. Maybe let's reduce the amount of edge wear. So where is that? It would be this guy, paint, mask, and the curvature, we can just remove it down a little bit so it's not so much. Looks better. And for these things, let's go back to the back. There's a couple things going on. I mean, they have, let's see what's going on here. So, bronze. Let's add only a height channel. I'm gonna go back to that textures and scroll to the very bottom, and you can see stripes. Let's drag that on to the height. And I'm gonna drag down the scale, the tiling, all the way down to make it small. Let's change the rotation. So I'm looking at the side here because I'm just having these little guys. So I can right click black mask, go to my projection and only do a UV shell. So that's why you do those UV cuts along these. That way I can just assign it to those little strips. We can create some bumped rivet patterns so you can actually like turn them, let's say. So that looks cool. I think we just need more dirt and grunge on the back so it looks a little bit more used. Actually, you know what could be cool? It's adding the dirt leak. And then adding, just dropping this down. I don't want it to be too crazy. Actually, the curvature more. All right, ambient, is it? There we go. And then I can just add more of a black color to it. Let's do that again. Just slowly build up some of these effects. And let's add that spots. I really like the spots because it's just like random things going on. Let's make these black, which you can't really see, but we'll increase it. And let's keep going. Let's add more. I guess I'm looking for some more areas around the stuff. So around these holes, kind of like this. So what we can do actually is just like add a little bit of black. And what I can do is add this into a folder if I want, and right click, add to a white mask, and then I can just paint away the stuff on the edges. That way it's only around those middle buttons, which is kind of nice. Let's just make it a little more metallic-y, so a little dark. You kind of get the idea. So what I like to do before moving on to too much is just jump into the renderer. So let's open up that renderer. Let's switch it to clear ground. Move this out of the way. And we can start visualizing how it's looking. So I think I want it just a little bit more reflective. So let's go back to the paint. Let's just make it a bit more reflective. Looks pretty cool. Trying to decide what we want to do here. You know what? I did say I wanted to mess around with that iron forge, so let's just throw this on really quick. That looks kind of cool actually. What if I did black mask and assigned it to that? And let's go into the iron forged, and let's make this a little bit more of that. It's almost like it's a different shade, which I kind of like actually. A little bit of variation in color, so they're not all identical. And I think this is just not there yet. So what we're gonna do is in this color, I'm just gonna mess around with this. So we're gonna make it a bit more metallic-y maybe. That looks better already. Maybe some more dirt. So let's go to the glass, which is really transparent at the moment. We're actually gonna drag that up. It always looks different in your editor, keep in mind. Sometimes things look good and then you have to jump back. So let's just make it not so see-through. Yeah, not that much though. Like this maybe. Which is nice, but let's do a couple things. So one, the metal is looking too metallic. And this is looking black. So at this point, it's just all about like just tweaking things. So let's go back to that dark steel. And let's make the steel not so dark. I like the idea of having red tips, which I saw on some reference. So I'm just gonna add Just trying something, see if it works well. It might not. Let's go to a hard brush. That way we can just paint on. I don't know if we like that or not. Let's just increase the red maybe, so it's brighter. Too bright. Looks good. Let's just add, let's go back to the glass and that original dirt we had. This dirt, which is nice. I just want to increase it, I think. Have a bit more blackness around the edge, which kind of looks cool. And to be honest with you, I think the glass just needs a little bit of dirt on it. It's looking a little bit too clean. So let's go ahead and let's add. This might be too much. But if we reduce a lot, we can change the color to something like maybe brown. Some sort of dirt that's on top, which helps a little bit. Maybe it's make the glass a little bit more. So as you can see, it's just lots of tweaking at this point, kind of jumping back and seeing, you know, how clear do you want some stuff. So that's good, but I think this dirt that I added is just too much. I want it to be very subtle. I always find gradually building it up works better than the opposite. Okay, so these are pretty good. What we need to do is just add some stuff here. So on the back, on the bronze, we'll call this back. I'm going to quickly find an alpha. I'm gonna add a level to it. Sorry, add a layer to it, and I'm going to drag down the height. Turn off all those channels, so I only have the height channel. And we can choose one of these alphas. So which one looks good? Let me see which one we can use. You know what, this one actually might. Let's do this. Okay, so I'm gonna right click, set to a black mask. I can double click one of these and it automatically hooks it up to the alpha, or you can just drag it onto the alpha. I can increase this. Now I'm gonna find the UV shell, which will make this a little bit easier. And what I'm gonna do is just line this. So I want to flip it. Take our eraser. I'm going to go to the brush and hit the hard select brush just to remove the soft select. And all I'm going to do is just start erasing kind of where I think the beginning is. That way I can just add a little bit of bump, and that's obviously too much bump, so let's drop this down a lot. Let's go to 1, 2. I think that works better. But but we need to, you know, it's funny, I had that ring originally on here that we never ended up extruding. So I'm gonna add that myself because I think, so we're gonna add another height. I'm gonna increase the height now, put it to a black mask. I'm gonna go back to those alphas and find a ring. So the circles, the double circles will work because all we can do is just inside width, we can turn to 0. So we have one ring. Make this one as well. Oh, outer, we want the outer one, sorry. So I can actually, and I can't increase the size anymore. There we go. For some reason it does this. The UV shells are too big. Okay, so outside circle, let's make this nice and thin. And let's, if you're holding Alt and you're rotating, you can press Shift and it'll snap to one of the side or front. So I'm gonna snap it to the back so I know I'm looking at it directly on. And then I can just paste this. Oh, the worst part is I had it. I don't know if you guys ever done that, but you're on this erase, not the draw. It's the worst. Okay, so let's redo that. I'm gonna go to 150. It should be good. And we can just paste that on, which is nice. I actually didn't like the, I don't know if I want, kind of talking out loud, or thinking out loud. I'm not sure if I want this outside ring or not. What do you guys think? Even though I can't hear your answer. Yeah, you know what? It's kind of cool. Adds a little bit more shape to it. Let's just keep that. As you can see, it's just lots of trial and error. Just try things, see what works, see what doesn't. So this we forgot. So I'm gonna go to my iron forged and assign it to that mesh. That's way too dark. Let's go use your silver armor. And that's about it. That's basically everything. So I'm going to do, I always like adding little personal touches if I can. So one thing also, I think the backside, if I'm looking at this reference, like, I mean, these ones are really beaten up. So I don't want to necessarily go that much, but I feel like we can add a bit more dirt to it. So let's add one more fill layer. Let's go to the smart materials. Not that one. Don't know if I want scratches. We want some wear, maybe. That could be nice. Let's see what's going on here. Maybe make it a little black, or rather brown, like dirt or something is on there. That helps. Maybe let's do one more. Don't want to get too carried away here, but this was what I was looking for originally. Was that wear in the circle around the edges? I actually really like that. I find that always helps define the shapes more, like comparing that to that. Such a big difference, at least in my opinion, for such a little thing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I also like to add personal touches, as you know. It just helps make it feel more, I don't know, personalized, I guess. So I'm gonna do classic. I'm gonna right click black mask, go to the text. You can find any text. There's some really cool drawing ones that look like someone like wrote. So I'm gonna actually select one of those. If I can find one that works good. Or even like a handwritten one could be cool, or like this. So I'm gonna drag that over and you can type in whatever you want. So I'm gonna go PR for Polyrendr. I tend to do this on a lot of my models just for fun, so it looks like. And maybe go P dot R. Maybe a little closer like that. Why not? A little something, something. A little something, something. And you know what? I'm actually going to change the roughness. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to take the bronze that we have. I'm going to duplicate that just by holding shift and dragging it up. I'm going to go back to my self-select, my polygon fill, and just drag it to 0 so I can unselect everything so it's not assigned to anything. I'm going to re-drag that up. I'm going to go back just so I can see what I'm doing and make this a bit darker. And then I can assign this only to these ones. And this thing. Want a bit more variation in color on the back, and I find sometimes if you want to do that, you just need to just change the shading of some of the similar materials, and it can help just have more, see it look a little bit darker, a little more interesting. At least in my opinion, I guess, but it depends who you ask. It's looking pretty good. The only thing I don't like is, I don't know if I don't like it. I don't know, I'm deciding if I want the roughness. So for example, on the green, I can go to the steel painted. Let's add a level, add a fill layer. I'm saying add a level. Add another fill layer. And maybe we can add a little bit of, let's see, soft dirt. Nope. That's kind of cool. Take down the curvature. And we can increase the metallic to make it a little rougher, so we can see a little bit of dirt on there as well. Not sure if that's just to add a little bit more dirt, which I think I like. I think what I don't like is the color of the dirt here. It goes like too bright brown. I think that looks better. And let's make it a bit more reflective. And let's make the glass. As you can see, I'm just kind of bouncing around, but as you add stuff, sometimes other things need tweaking, and you kind of keep doing that over and over. At least I found that works for me, until you find a nice middle ground of, I think that looks good. Anyways, don't spend all day on this, but as you can see, it's looking a little bit better, I think. For these, I think what I'm actually going to do is these need a little bit more wear. I think that's what it is. So I'm also going to do something. See these middle circles? I'm going to jump into, so this is actually fun, good opportunity. I'm going to jump back into my scene here. And let's just hide our glass for a second. I'm going to take these and enlarge them. I'm going to drag this one in. And these two as well. I think they could be bigger. So what we're going to do is take this mesh. We're going to file and export. I'm going to overwrite the exact same file I have. Export. export. We're going to overwrite it. So I come back into my substance. First off, we need to save, which I haven't done. And I probably should, because saving is important. So now that it's saved, we can go to edit, re-import mesh. So nothing's changing. It's going to be just those, hopefully those little screws in the middle are going to be a bit bigger, which help. And then I think all I'm going to do is I'm going to unselect it from there. So it's just on this top piece only. And I'm going to assign the bronze to those components. I think the bronze will work. You know what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to not do that. I'm going to duplicate this again, just like we did before, and assign it to them, but I'm going to take this one and just make it a little bit brighter. Or a lot brighter, and I can remove it because it's assigned to everything else in my scene. So I can remove it from all these other ones. And then I think for the black that we have for the arms, I think it just needs something. A little something, maybe a little bit of scratch. Let's add a fill there. Let's go to some edges. One of these edge ones, edge cavity maybe. Nope. Edge concrete. No, that's better. Let's just bring it down. And let's make this more of a metallic, so it's actually like metal. That might look cool, might not. Let's find out. It's okay. Let's reduce it. Just to add a very tiny bit, just something. And that's our clock. As you can see, this is basically the process, so we can keep adjusting materials and values until we find something that we're happy with. But I think this is gonna work. To be honest, on the back metal piece, I think I want this bronze, which is just this one, right? Yeah. Back to be just darker. I don't know. Let's find out. What do you guys think? We can Control Z that. I can jump back. And maybe a little bit. I think that's good. What do you think? Actually, this black is on the edges here, which is one of these. Let's see which one it is. This one? Yeah, this one. Let's make it metallic. And the reason why just makes it just way darker. Just really brings out that roughness, and I think that's what we want. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Anyways, I hope this helped clarify some of the stuff. So what I would do now is just, you can render it. So I would increase the sample value. I usually increase it to like 5,000, the max time around 500. It'll just allow you to render it a little bit more to help reduce some of those little artifacts or pixels or little things you see. The longer you let it sit and render, the nicer it usually looks. But that's basically everything. That is the whole 3D modeling, UV mapping, and texturing process that I did to create this alarm clock. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video, and I hope you found it helpful. I know I don't do a lot of these full walkthroughs where I'm narrating the whole time. Apologize you had to listen to my voice for this long, but the more you obviously make models, the better you will get, the quicker you will get, and you'll figure out little workflows and things that work for you. You know, there's not always a clear right and wrong way of doing something, and I think it just matters. It's really up to you as an artist, depending on how you want things to look and what approach works best for you, because not everyone's brain is the same. So try things out, see what works for you. I'm just trying a few things right now, just seeing, where's the iron forged? Oh, this is the iron, but do we have another iron somewhere? I swear we did. Well, let's just add another one. I'm just seeing if I like the beaten up look for this top piece, similar to our reference. I'll put the reference back. Kind of has like something like this going on, and I'm not sure if I actually like having this as a separate. No, I don't think so. Sometimes you just have to try things to see. Maybe if the whole clock was like a metal, it would work better. I think it definitely looks better with it colored. What I'm gonna try doing actually is changing the color of this to be similar. Just seeing if it works better. Which doesn't look bad. Just trying things out. That looks cool too. So, I mean, it really depends on what kind of look you're going for, but I don't know. I wish I could listen, or you guys could listen or mention right now which one you think is better. I kind of like the bright one. It's a little more happier looking, if that makes any sense. I don't know. Anyways, I hope you guys found this video helpful. That's basically the full walkthrough. So at this point, what you can do is just save your renders out. I usually bring those into Photoshop because they render transparent. You don't have to worry about the background. That's why I always switch it to clear, because you can add whatever background you want after. Also, using a studio light's nice because you can see the actual color. So if I exported these materials, it'd be hopefully pretty accurate in different software like Unreal Engine or Maya or wherever I'm exporting this to. Anyways, let me know in the comments what you thought about this video. If you enjoy these types of videos and you want to see more tutorial-based videos, please consider subscribing to the channel or liking the video. It's the best way to help support my art. And if you want to help support my art in an even bigger way, Patreon is by far the best place to do that. I'm also going to upload all of the working files for this specific clock. So if you want this model, you can find it all on my Patreon page, as well as other tips and tricks that I'm going to be uploading in sooner than later. I got lots planned to upload this year, so I'm hoping to be a little bit more active on my Patreon page. So if you want to stay tuned and be part of that community and help support my art, that's by far the best place, and please go check it out. It's the link to my Patreon will be in the description below. All right, thanks so much for tuning into this week's video. I appreciate all of you, and Happy New Year. I'll catch you guys in the next one.